the notes, the introductions, the clarification, and the acquisition of al-Atibi, as well as the book of Ibn al-Hajib and what has been written on it. Then, one needs to distinguish the Qayrawani method from the Cordoban, Baghdadi, and Egyptian methods, and the methods of those who came after them, and to encompass all of that. At that point, the position of issuing fatwas is granted to him, and all of it is repetitive with the same meaning. The learner is required to memorize all of them and distinguish between them, while a lifetime passes in one of them. If teachers limited the learners to the doctrinal issues only, the matter would be much easier, and education would be simple and accessible. But it is a disease that does not diminish due to the established habits, making it like a nature that cannot be transferred or transformed. The science of Arabic is also exemplified by the Book of Sibawayh, and all that has been written on it, and the methods of the Basrians, Kufi, Baghdadi, and Andalusian scholars after them, and the methods of the early and later scholars like Ibn al-Hajib and Ibn Malik, and all that has been written in that regard. How can the learner be demanded to study all of this, while a lifetime passes without achieving it? No one hopes to reach the ultimate goal, except in rare instances, like what has reached us in Morocco at this time, from the writings of a man from the field of Arabic language, from Egypt, known as Ibn Hashim, whose words indicate that he has attained a mastery of that discipline that has only been achieved by Sibawayh, Ibn Jinni, and their peers, due to his great mastery and what he has encompassed of the principles of that art and its branches and his good handling of it. This is on the condition that virtue is not limited to the early scholars, especially with what we have presented regarding the multitude of distractions due to the diversity of schools, methods, and writings, but the grace of God is bestowed upon whom he wills. This is a rarity among the rarest of existences. Otherwise, it appears that the learner, even if he spends his entire life on all of this, will not suffice to acquire knowledge of Arabic, for example, which is merely a tool and a means. How then can one achieve the intended goal, which is the fruit? But God guides whom he wills.
Chapter 35.
On the purposes that should be relied upon in authorship and the cancellation of others. Know that human sciences are the treasury of the human soul, as God has placed in it the perception that benefits it through the acquired thought, which is achieved first by the conception of truths, and then by affirming or denying their inherent attributes, either directly or indirectly, until the mind deduces its demands that it seeks to affirm or deny. Once a scientific image is established in the consciousness, it must be articulated to others, either in the form of teaching or in the form of discussion, refining thoughts in their correctness. This articulation is only possible through expression, which is the speech composed of the verbal terms created by God in the organ of the tongue, composed of letters, and it is the manner of sounds articulated by the muscles of the uvula and tongue, so that the inner thoughts of speakers can be clarified to one another in their communications. This is the first rank in expressing what is in the consciousness, and although most of it and its noblest are sciences, it encompasses everything that is included in the consciousness, whether news or creation in general. After this first rank of expression, there is a second rank that cannot convey what is in the consciousness for someone whose person is concealed or absent, or for someone who comes later and has not encountered or met him. This expression is confined to writing, which is the marks made by hand that indicate their shapes and forms in a humble manner on the verbal terms, letter by letter and word by word. Thus, the expression in it is based on what is in the consciousness through logical speech, and for this reason, it is in the second rank as one, and this expression is called. It indicates what is in the consciousness of sciences and knowledge, and it is the noblest of them. The people of the arts are keen to deposit what they acquire in their consciousness in the depths of papers through this writing, so that the benefit of it may reach the absent and the later ones, and these are the authors. The compositions among human worlds and nations are many, and they are transmitted through generations and eras, differing according to the differences in laws, sects, and news about nations and states. As for philosophical sciences, there is no difference in them, as they come on a single path, according to what is required by the intellectual nature, in conceiving existence as they are, whether corporeal, spiritual, celestial, elemental, abstract, or material. These sciences do not differ, And the difference occurs in religious sciences due to the differences in sects, or historical sciences due to the differences in external news. Then writing differs according to human conventions in its forms and shapes, and this is called pen and script. Among them is the Himyarite script, known as the Musnad, which is the writing of the Himyarites and the ancient people of Yemen, and it differs from the writing of the later Arabs of Muda, just as it differs from their language, and all of them are Arabic. However, the mastery of these in language and expression is different from the mastery of those. Each of them has general laws derived from their expressions, which are not the laws of others. And perhaps those who do not know the mastery of expression may err in this. Among them is the Syriac script, which is the writing of the Nabateans and Chaldeans. Some ignorant people may claim that it is the natural script due to its antiquity, as they were the earliest nations, and this is an illusion and a common misconception. Because all voluntary actions are not natural, but rather they continue with the old and the practice until they become a firm mastery, which the observer mistakenly assumes to be natural, as is the opinion of many simpletons regarding the Arabic language, who say, the Arabs spoke naturally and articulated naturally. This is an illusion. Among them is the Hebrew script, which is the writing of the descendants of Eber, son of Shala, from the children of Israel and others. Among them is the Latin script, the script of the Latins from the Romans, and they also have a language specific to them. Each nation has a convention in writing attributed to it and specific to it, such as the Turks, Franks, Indians, and others. The focus has been on the first three scripts. As for the Syriac, due to its antiquity as mentioned, and as for the Arabic and Hebrew, it is because the Quran and the Torah were revealed in their languages. These two scripts were expressions for their recitations, so the focus was initially on their verses, and laws were established for the consistency of expression in that language in its style to understand the legislative laws from that divine speech. As for the Latin, the Romans, who are the people of that language, when they adopted Christianity, which is all from the Torah, as mentioned at the beginning of the book, they translated the Torah and the writings of the Israeli prophets into their language to extract the rulings in the easiest ways. Their concern for their language and writing became more pronounced than others. As for the other scripts, they did not receive attention, but rather each nation has its own according to its convention. Then people limited the purposes of authorship that should be relied upon and the cancellation of others, counting them as 7. The first is to derive knowledge about its subject and to divide its chapters and sections and to follow its issues, or to derive issues and discussions that are presented to the knowledgeable scholar, and he strives to connect it with others, so that the benefit may be widespread, and he deposits that in a book in the manuscript, hoping that the later ones may benefit from it, as occurred in the fundamentals of jurisprudence. Al-Shafi'i first spoke about the verbal legal evidences and summarized them. Then the Hanafis came and derived the issues of analogy and encompassed them, benefiting from that until now. The second is to review the words of the ancients and their compositions, finding them obscure to the minds, and God opens for him understanding of them, so he strives to clarify that for others who may find it obscure, so that the benefit reaches its rightful owner. This is the method of expression for the books of reason and transmission, and it is a noble section. The third is for the later one to discover a mistake or error in the words of the ancients, who are renowned for their virtue and have a reputation for benefiting, and he verifies that with clear evidence that leaves no room for doubt, striving to convey that to those who come after him, as it has become difficult to erase and remove it due to the spread of compositions in the horizons and eras, and the fame of the author, and the trust of people in his knowledge, so he deposits that in a book to clarify that. The fourth is, for a single art to have issues or sections that are lacking according to the division of its subject, so the one who is aware of that aims to complete what is lacking from those issues to perfect the art with all its issues and sections, leaving no room for deficiency in it. The fifth is, for the issues of knowledge to be unarranged in their chapters and not organized, so the one who is aware of that aims to arrange and refine them, placing each issue in its chapter, as occurred in the Mudawwana from the narration of Sahnun from Ibn al-Qasim, and in the Atbiya from the narration of al-Atbi from the companions of Malik, as many issues from the chapters of jurisprudence have occurred in other chapters, and Ibn Abi Zayd refined the Mudawwana, while the Atbiya remained unrefined. We find in every chapter issues from others. They relied on the Mudawwana and what Ibn Abi Zayd did in it, and al-Baradi after him. The sixth is, for the issues of knowledge to be scattered in their chapters from other sciences, so some virtuous individuals become aware of the subject of that art and all its issues, and they do that, revealing an art that organizes it among the sciences that humans adopt with their thoughts, as occurred in the science of rhetoric. For indeed, Abd al-Kahir al-Jurjani and Abu Yusuf al-Sakaki found its issues established in the books of grammar, and al-Jahiz collected many issues from it in the book of rhetoric and elucidation, making people aware of the subject of that science and its distinction from other sciences. So they wrote their famous compositions in that, and it became foundational for the art of rhetoric, and the later ones learned it, surpassing all the ancients in it. The seventh is, for something from the compositions that are the foundations of the arts to be lengthy and elaborate, so the aim of the compositions is to summarize that, with brevity and conciseness and the removal of repetition, if it occurs, while being cautious not to omit what is necessary, so as not to undermine the original purpose of the author. These are the collective purposes that should be relied upon in authorship and observed. As for anything else, it is an unnecessary act and a deviation from the path that must be followed in the eyes of the rational, such as claiming what has been previously authored by others and attributing it to oneself with some deception, by altering the words and presenting the later and vice versa, or omitting what is needed in the art, or introducing what is unnecessary, or replacing the correct with the incorrect, or presenting what has no benefit. This is the nature of ignorance and audacity. And thus Aristotle said, when he enumerated these purposes and reached the last of them, and anything else is a section or its evil, meaning thereby ignorance and audacity. We seek refuge in God from acting in what is not appropriate for a rational person to pursue, and God guides to the path that is most upright.
Chapter 36.
On the fact that the abundance of abbreviations composed in the sciences is detrimental to education, many of the later scholars have resorted to abbreviating the methods and approaches in the sciences, becoming enamored with them and recording a summarized program in each science that includes a compilation of its issues and their proofs in a concise manner, often cramming a few words with many meanings from that art. This has led to a detriment in eloquence and difficulty in understanding. They sometimes resort to the lengthy foundational books in the arts for interpretation and clarification, summarizing them for ease of memorization, as Ibn al-Hajib did in jurisprudence, Ibn Malik in Arabic, and al-Kunji in logic, among others. This is a corruption in education and a disruption in acquisition, because it confuses the beginner by presenting the ultimate goals of knowledge to him when he is not yet prepared to accept them, which is a form of poor teaching, as will be discussed later. Moreover, it imposes a significant burden on the learner by requiring them to track the difficult terms of the abbreviations, which are laden with meanings, making it hard to extract the issues from among them. The terms of the summaries are often difficult and complex, hindering a good understanding from being achieved in a reasonable time. Furthermore, the mastery gained from education in those summaries, if completed correctly and not followed by any defect, is a limited mastery compared to the skills acquired from simple, lengthy subjects due to the frequent repetition and references that are beneficial for achieving complete mastery. If one relies solely on repetition, the mastery will be limited due to its scarcity, as is the case with these summarized subjects. They aim to facilitate memorization for the learners, but instead burden them with difficulties that hinder the acquisition of useful skills and their establishment. And whom God guides, none can mislead, and whom he misleads, none can guide. And God, the exalted and almighty, knows best. Chapter 37.
On the right approach to teaching sciences and the way to benefit from it.
Know that imparting knowledge to learners is only beneficial if it is done gradually, little by little, starting with fundamental issues from each branch of the art, which are the foundations of that branch. It is explained to them in a general manner, taking into account the strength of their intellect and their readiness to accept what is presented to them until they reach the end of the art, at which point they acquire a partial and weak mastery of that knowledge. Its ultimate goal is to prepare them to understand the art and acquire its issues. Then they return to the art a second time, elevating their instruction from that level to a higher one, completing the explanation and clarification, moving beyond generalities, and addressing the disagreements present until they reach the end of the art, thus refining their mastery. Then they return, having strengthened their understanding, leaving no difficult, significant, or closed issue without clarifying it and unlocking its complexities, so they emerge from the art having fully grasped it. This is the beneficial method of teaching, which, as you have seen, is achieved through 3 repetitions. Some may achieve this in less time, depending on their innate abilities and what is accessible to them. We have witnessed many teachers in our time who are ignorant of the methods of teaching and benefiting, presenting learners with complex issues from the science at the beginning of their education and demanding that they engage their minds in solving them, believing this to be training in education and correctness, while burdening them with the responsibility of understanding and acquiring it, mixing for them the goals of the arts with their fundamentals before they are ready to comprehend them. Acceptance of knowledge and readiness to understand develop gradually, and the learner initially struggles to understand in general, except in the least, and in a manner of approximation and generalization with good examples. Then their readiness continues to develop gradually through exposure to the issues of that art and their repetition, transitioning from approximation to comprehensive understanding, until mastery is completed in readiness and acquisition, and they encompass the issues of the art. If the goals are presented to them at the beginning, while they are still unable to understand and grasp them, and far from being prepared for them, their minds will be distant from it, and this will be perceived as the difficulty of knowledge itself, leading them to become lazy and turn away from accepting it, continuing to neglect it. This is due to poor teaching. The teacher should not overwhelm the learner beyond understanding the book they are focused on, according to their capacity and their readiness for learning, whether they are beginners or advanced, and should not mix the issues of the book with others until they comprehend it from beginning to end, achieving its objectives and acquiring a mastery that allows them to apply it elsewhere. Because when a learner acquires some mastery in a field of knowledge, they become prepared to accept what remains and gain enthusiasm in seeking more and advancing to higher levels until they grasp the goals of knowledge. If the matter is mixed for them, they will struggle to understand, become fatigued, their thoughts will become obscured, and they will despair of acquiring knowledge and education. And God guides whom He wills. Likewise, you should not prolong the learner's engagement in a single art by dispersing sessions and breaking them apart, as this leads to forgetfulness and the disconnection of issues within the art, making it difficult to achieve mastery through separation. If the beginnings and ends of knowledge are present in thought, away from forgetfulness, mastery becomes easier to achieve and more firmly connected, as mastery is obtained through the continuity and repetition of action. If the action is forgotten, the mastery arising from it is also forgotten, and God teaches you what you did not know. Among the beautiful methods and necessary approaches in teaching is not to mix 2 sciences together for the learner, as they will rarely succeed in grasping either due to the division of their attention and their diversion from each to understand the other, causing both to become obscure and difficult, leading to disappointment from both. If the mind is focused solely on teaching what is relevant, it is more likely to achieve it, and God, the exalted and almighty, is the guide to the truth. Know, O learner, that I present you with a benefit in your learning. If you accept it and hold it with the hand of skill, you will attain a great treasure and a noble resource. I offer you an introduction to assist you in understanding it. Human thought is a specific nature created by God, just as He created all His other creations, and it is the experience of movement of the soul in the middle part of the brain. Sometimes it serves as a starting point for human actions in an orderly manner, and sometimes it serves as a starting point for knowledge that has not yet been attained by directing attention to the desired. It may visualize its extremes, seeking to negate or affirm it, and the middle that connects them becomes apparent faster than the blink of an eye if it is singular. Or it transitions to acquiring another if it is multiple, leading to the attainment of its desired goal. This is the nature of this intellectual faculty that distinguishes humans from other animals. Then, logical skill is the manner of action of this theoretical intellectual nature, describing it to learn its correctness from its errors. Although correctness is inherent to it, errors may occur at least from misrepresenting the extremes in their forms due to confusion in the arrangement of propositions and their order for outcomes. Logic is thus necessary to escape the pitfalls of this corruption when it arises. Therefore, logic is an artificial matter that corresponds to the intellectual nature and aligns with the form of its action, and because it is an artificial matter, it is often unnecessary. That is why you find many of the great thinkers in creation achieving their goals in sciences without the skill of logic, especially with sincere intentions and seeking the mercy of God, for that is of the greatest significance. They navigate through the intellectual nature in its correctness, leading naturally to the attainment of the middle and knowledge of the desired as God created it. Then, beyond this artificial matter, which is logic, there is another prerequisite for learning, which is the knowledge of words and their indications of mental meanings, derived from the verbal expressions in writing and the spoken language in discourse. Therefore, O learner, you must surpass all these veils to think about your desired goal. First, the indication of written expressions on spoken words, which is the lightest, then the indication of spoken words on the desired meanings, and then the rules for arranging meanings for inference in their known forms in the art of logic. Then those meanings, abstracted in thought, are required to capture the desired through the intellectual nature by seeking the mercy and gifts of God. Not everyone can quickly surpass these stages or easily cut through these veils in learning. Rather, the mind may become stuck in the veils of words through discussions or stumble in the shared evidence due to the turmoil of debate and doubts, hindering the attainment of the desired. Few manage to escape from that confusion, except for those whom God has guided. If you are afflicted with such a situation and experience confusion in your understanding or disturbance from doubts in your mind, cast that aside and remove the veils of words and the obstacles of doubts, and leave the artificial matter altogether, returning to the expanse of natural thought upon which you were created. Free your gaze in it and empty your mind to dive into your goal, placing it where the great thinkers before you placed it, seeking the opening from God as He opened upon them from their minds through His mercy and taught them what they did not know. If you do this, the lights of divine opening will shine upon you, leading you to your desired goal, and you will attain the middle that God has made a consequence of this thought and its contemplation, as we have said. Then return it to the forms of evidence and their images, pouring it into them and fulfilling its rights from the artificial law. Then clothe it in the forms of words and present it to the world of discourse and conversation, firmly tied and soundly constructed. However, if you remain stuck at the discussion and doubt in the artificial evidence and scrutinizing its correctness from its errors, these are artificial matters that are situational and have multiple aspects that resemble each other due to their formulation and terminology. The aspect of truth will not become clear, as the aspect of truth is only clarified when it is natural. Thus, what has been obtained from doubt and uncertainty will persist, and the veils will be drawn over the desired, hindering the observer from attaining it. This is the case for most observers and later thinkers, especially those who have previously struggled with their language, which has hindered their minds, and those who have faced turmoil with logical law, becoming attached to it, believing it to be the means to grasp the truth naturally, thus falling into confusion between the doubts of evidence and their uncertainties, and they can hardly escape from it. The means to grasp the truth naturally is, as we have said, natural thought, when it is stripped of all illusions, and the observer exposes themselves to the mercy of God. As for logic, it merely describes the action of this thought and often corresponds to it. Consider this and seek the mercy of God whenever you find yourself lacking in understanding the issues. His lights will shine upon you with inspiration towards the truth, and God is the guide to His mercy, and knowledge is only from God.
Chapter 38.
Regarding the fact that divine sciences do not allow for expansive views or branching of issues, know that the sciences recognized among the people of civilization are of two types. Sciences that are sought for their own sake, such as religious sciences, including interpretation, hadith, jurisprudence, and theology, as well as natural and divine sciences from philosophy, and sciences that are merely tools for these sciences, such as Arabic and arithmetic, and others for the religious sciences, like logic for philosophy. These may also serve as tools for theology and the principles of jurisprudence according to the later scholars. As for the sciences that are objectives, there is no harm in expanding the discussion about them, branching out issues, and exploring evidence and views, as this enhances the student's mastery and clarifies their intended meanings. However, for the sciences that are tools for others, such as Arabic and logic and similar subjects, one should only consider them as tools for that other science. There should be no extensive discussion or branching of issues in them, as that would divert them from their intended purpose, which is to serve as tools and nothing more. The more one strays from that, the more one deviates from the objective, and engaging in them becomes futile, especially given the difficulty of mastering them due to their length and numerous branches. This may hinder the acquisition of the sciences that are sought for their own sake, as the means are lengthy, while the matter is more important, and life is too short to acquire everything in this manner. Thus, engaging in these tool sciences becomes a waste of time and a distraction from what is truly beneficial. This is similar to what the later scholars did in the fields of grammar, logic, and the principles of jurisprudence, as they expanded the scope of discussion in these areas and increased the branching and arguments, which took them away from being mere tools and turned them into objectives. Consequently, there may arise views and issues in them that are unnecessary for the sciences that are sought, and they are of a trivial nature. They are also harmful to learners in general, as learners are more concerned with the sciences that are objectives than with their means. If they spend their lives acquiring the means, when will they attain the objectives? Therefore, it is essential for teachers of these tool sciences not to overindulge in their matters or to increase their issues, and to alert the learner to their purpose and keep them focused on it. If a learner's ambition then drives them to delve into something deeper, and they feel capable and sufficient in it, let them pursue whatever they wish, whether difficult or easy, for everyone is facilitated for what they were created for.
Chapter 39.
On the education of children and the differing methods of Islamic regions in its approaches. Know that teaching children the Quran is a hallmark of the religion, which the people of the faith have adhered to in all their regions, due to the deep-rooted faith and beliefs that arise in the hearts from the verses of the Quran and some texts of Hadith. The Quran has become the foundation of education upon which subsequent skills are built. The reason for this is that early education is more firmly established and serves as a basis for what follows, as the first impressions on the hearts are like the foundation for skills. The state of those who are built upon this foundation depends on its quality and methods. Their methods of teaching the Quran to children differ based on what skills arise from that education. As for the people of the Maghreb, their approach with children is to limit education to the Quran only, and during their studies they focus on its script and issues, and the differences among the carriers of the Quran, without mixing it with anything else in their teaching sessions, whether it be hadith, jurisprudence, poetry, or Arabic speech, until the child becomes proficient in it, or stops short of it, which often results in a general cessation of knowledge. This is the method of the people of the cities in the Maghreb, and those who follow them from the Berber villages, continuing until they surpass the age of maturity into youth. Similarly, for adults who return to studying the Quran after a period of their lives, they are therefore more steadfast in the script of the Quran and its memorization than others. As for the people of Andalusia, their method is to teach the Quran and writing as it is, and this is what they observe in education. However, since the Quran is the foundation of that and the source of religion and sciences, they make it a cornerstone in education. They do not limit themselves to it alone, but mix in their teaching of children the recitation of poetry in most cases, writing, and adherence to the rules of Arabic, memorization, and improving handwriting. Their focus in education is not solely on the Quran, but their attention to handwriting is greater than all else until the child reaches the age of maturity into youth, having gained some proficiency in Arabic and poetry and knowledge of them, excelling in handwriting and writing, and generally clinging to the pursuit of knowledge if there were a chain for teaching sciences. However, they cease from that due to the lack of a chain of education in their regions, and they only acquire what they gained from that initial education. This is sufficient for those whom God guides, and is a preparation if a teacher is found. As for the people of Africa, they mix in their teaching of children the Quran with Hadith in most cases, and the study of the laws of sciences, and the teaching of some of its issues. But their attention to the Quran, and their urging of children to it, and their understanding of its various recitations and readings is greater than anything else, and their attention to handwriting follows that. In general, their method of teaching the Quran is closer to that of the people of Andalusia, because their methods chain is connected to the scholars of Andalusia, who migrated when the Christians overran eastern Andalusia and settled in Tunisia, from whom their children later learned. As for the people of the East, they also mix in education as we are informed, and I do not know what their focus is. What is conveyed to us is that their focus is on studying the Quran and the books of knowledge and their laws during youth, and they do not mix in teaching handwriting, but teaching handwriting has its own rules and teaches separately, as other crafts are learned, and they do not practice it in the schools of children. When they write for them on tablets, it is in a handwriting that falls short of excellence, and whoever wants to learn handwriting does so according to what becomes available to him later in terms of enthusiasm for seeking it and pursuing it from those skilled in it. As for the people of Africa and the Maghreb, their limitation to the Quran has resulted in a deficiency in the mastery of the tongue in general, as the Quran does not typically lead to mastery because people are diverted from producing something like it. Thus they are diverted from using its methods and emulating them. They do not have mastery in anything other than its methods, so the possessor does not gain mastery in the Arabic language, and their share is rigidity in expressions and a lack of fluency in speech. The people of Africa might be lighter in this regard than the people of the Maghreb, because they mix in their teaching of the Quran with expressions of sciences in their laws, as we mentioned, allowing them some ability to express and parallel examples with examples, but their mastery in that is limited compared to eloquence, as will be discussed in its chapter. As for the people of Andalusia, their varied education and the abundance of poetry recitation and writing and the study of Arabic from an early age have granted them a mastery that made them more knowledgeable in the Arabic language. They fell short in other sciences due to their distance from studying the Quran and Hadith, which are the foundation and basis of sciences. Therefore, they were people of fortune and excellent manners, or deficient, depending on what the secondary education is after the education of the child. Indeed, the judge Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi, in his travel book, adopted a strange approach to education and reiterated that he prioritized teaching Arabic and poetry over other sciences, as is the method of the people of Andalusia. He said, "Because poetry is the record of the Arabs, and it calls for its precedence, and teaching Arabic in education is necessary to prevent the corruption of the language, then he transitions from it to arithmetic to practice it until he sees the laws, then he moves on to studying the Quran, for this introduction will make it easier for you." Then he said, "Oh, the negligence of the people of our land in taking the child with the book of God in its commands, reading what he does not understand, and engaging in matters that are not as important to him." Then he said he should look into the foundations of religion, then the foundations of jurisprudence, then debate, then hadith and its sciences, and he forbade mixing two sciences in education unless the learner is capable of that with good understanding and enthusiasm. This is what the judge Abu Bakr, may God have mercy on him, indicated, and it is indeed a good method, but customs do not support it, as they are more dominant in circumstances, and the reason for what customs have specified in prioritizing the study of the Quran is to seek blessings and reward, and out of fear of what may befall the child in the madness of youth from afflictions and interruptions from knowledge, causing him to miss the Quran, because as long as he is in childhood, he is subject to authority. When he surpasses maturity and is released from the bonds of oppression, the winds of youth may sweep him away, throwing him into the abyss of idleness, so they take advantage of the time of childhood and the bonds of authority to acquire the Quran so that he does not go empty of it. If certainty were established regarding his continuity in seeking knowledge and accepting education, the method mentioned by the judge would be the most appropriate for the people of the Maghreb and the East. But God decrees what he wills. There is no one to overturn his decree. Chapter 40. Regarding the fact that harshness towards learners is harmful to them, as the sharpening of the edge through education is detrimental to the learner, especially in the case of younger children, because it leads to a poor disposition. Those who are raised through oppression and coercion, whether they are learners, slaves, or servants, are overwhelmed by oppression and restricted in their ability to express themselves, which diminishes their energy and leads them to laziness, prompting them to lie and be deceitful, pretending to be what they are not out of fear of being subjected to oppression. This teaches them cunning and deception, becoming habitual and ingrained in their character, corrupting their sense of humanity in terms of social interaction and practice, as well as their ability to defend themselves and their homes. They become dependent on others in this regard, and their souls become lazy in acquiring virtues and good character, retracting from their ultimate goals and the extent of their humanity, falling back to the lowest of the low. This has happened to every nation that has fallen under the grip of oppression and has suffered from coercion, as seen in anyone who has authority over them. The governing disposition that should support them does not accompany them. This can be observed through examination, such as in the case of the Jews, and the bad character that has resulted from this, to the extent that they are described negatively in every context. The term haraj, in its commonly understood meaning, refers to deceit and scheming, which stems from what we have mentioned. Therefore, it is necessary for the teacher with his student and the parent with his child not to be overly harsh in discipline. Muhammad ibn Abi Zayd stated in his book on the rules for teachers and learners, "A teacher of children should not exceed 3 lashes when they are in need of punishment." From the words of Umar, may God be pleased with him, "Whoever is not disciplined by the law, God will not discipline him." This is to protect souls from the humiliation of discipline, knowing that the measure set by the law for this is more effective, as it is more knowledgeable of their interests. One of the best methods of education was that which al-Rashid advanced to the teacher of his son. Al-Khalaf al-Ahmar said, "Al-Rashid sent for me regarding the education of his son, Muhammad al-Amin, saying, 'O Ahmar, the commander of the faithful has entrusted you with the essence of his soul and the fruit of his heart. So keep your hand upon him extended, and his obedience to you is obligatory. Be to him as the commander of the faithful has placed you. Teach him the Quran, inform him of the news, recite poetry to him, teach him the traditions, and make him aware of the contexts of speech and its beginnings. Prevent him from laughing except at appropriate times, and have him show respect to the elders of Banu Hashim when they enter upon him, and elevate the gatherings of the leaders when they attend his assembly. Do not let an hour pass without seizing a benefit to impart to him without causing him distress that would dull his mind. Do not be lenient with him to the point that he becomes accustomed to idleness. Guide him as much as you can with kindness and gentleness. If he resists both, then be firm and stern." Chapter 41. On the journey in pursuit of knowledge and meeting the scholars as an additional perfection in learning. The reason for this is that humans acquire their knowledge, morals, and the doctrines and virtues they adopt, sometimes through learning and teaching, and sometimes through imitation and direct reception. However, the attainment of faculties through direct engagement and reception is more firmly established and deeply rooted. The more numerous the scholars, the greater the acquisition and deepening of these faculties. The terminologies in teaching sciences are also mixed for the learner, to the extent that many of them may think it is part of the knowledge itself. This can only be overcome by direct engagement due to the differing methods among the teachers. Meeting the people of knowledge and the multiplicity of scholars benefits the learner by distinguishing the terminologies through observing the differences in their methods, thus stripping the knowledge of these terminologies and understanding that they are various methods of teaching and pathways that elevate one's abilities to firmness and stability in the subject, correcting and distinguishing their knowledge from others while strengthening their faculties through direct engagement and frequent reception from multiple and diverse scholars. This is for those whom God has made the paths of knowledge and guidance easy. The journey is essential in the pursuit of knowledge to acquire benefits and perfection through meeting scholars and engaging with individuals. And God guides whom He wills to a straight path. Chapter 42. Regarding the fact that scholars among humans are further removed from politics and its doctrines, the reason for this is that they are accustomed to intellectual contemplation and diving into meanings, extracting them from the tangible and abstracting them in the mind, forming general universal matters to be judged by the principles of sciences, not by specific material, person, generation, nation, or class of people. They then apply that universal to external realities. They also compare matters to their similarities and counterparts based on what they are used to from legal reasoning. Thus, their judgments and perspectives remain entirely in the mind and only conform to reality after completing research and contemplation. They do not generally conform, but rather what exists externally is separated from what is in the mind, such as legal rulings, which are branches of what is preserved from the evidence of the book and the sunnah, seeking conformity with what exists externally, unlike perspectives in rational sciences, which require their correctness to conform to what is external. They are accustomed in all their perspectives to mental matters and intellectual views, knowing nothing else. Politics requires its practitioner to consider what is external and the conditions that accompany it, as it is subtle. There may be aspects that prevent it from being likened to a similarity or example, and contradict the universality they attempt to apply to it. No aspect of civilization can be compared to another, even if they resemble each other in one matter. They may differ in others. Therefore, scholars, due to their habit of generalizing judgments and comparing matters to one another, when they contemplate politics, they pour that into the mold of their perspectives and types of reasoning, often falling into error, and they are not safe from it. This also applies to the intelligent and astute among the people of civilization, as they tend to delve into meanings and comparisons like jurists, leading them to error. The average person, with a sound nature and moderate intelligence, due to the limitations of their thought and lack of habituation to such matters, restricts each material to its ruling and each type of condition and person to what is specific to it, not extending the ruling through comparison or generalization, and does not stray far from tangible materials in their thoughts, much like a swimmer who does not stray from the shore when faced with waves. The poet said, "So do not venture too far when you swim, for safety lies on the shore." Thus, they are secure from contemplating their politics and have a straight perspective in dealing with their fellow beings, leading to a good livelihood and the avoidance of its calamities and harms through the correctness of their perspective. And above every knowledgeable person is the all-knowing. From this, it becomes clear that the art of logic is not free from error due to the abundance of abstraction within it and its distance from the tangible as it contemplates secondary intelligibles. There may be materials within it that contradict those judgments and oppose them when considering certain application. As for contemplating primary intelligibles, which are closely abstracted, it is not the same, as they are imaginary, and the forms of tangible things are preserving and indicative of the truth of their applicability. And God, the exalted and most high, knows best, and to him belongs success. Chapter 43.
Regarding the fact that the majority of the bearers of knowledge in Islam are non-Arabs.
The reality is that the majority of the bearers of knowledge in the Islamic community are non-Arabs, whether in religious sciences or rational sciences, except in rare cases. Even if an Arab is among them by lineage, he is non-Arab in his language, upbringing, and mentorship, despite the fact that the religion is Arabic and its lawgiver is Arab. The reason for this is that in the early days of the religion, there was neither knowledge nor craft due to the conditions of simplicity and nomadism. The rulings of the Sharia, which are the commands and prohibitions of God, were transmitted by men in their hearts, and they knew their sources from the book and the sunnah as received from the lawgiver and his companions. At that time, the people were Arabs who did not know the matter of education, authorship, or documentation, nor were they inclined towards it, nor did they feel the need for it. This continued during the time of the companions and the followers, and they were called those specialized in carrying that knowledge. They transmitted it to the readers, meaning those who read the book and were not illiterate, as illiteracy was a common trait among the companions since they were Arabs. Thus, the bearers of the Quran at that time were referred to as readers in reference to this. They were readers of the Book of God and the Sunnah transmitted from God because they did not know the legal rulings except from it and from the Hadith, which in most of its sources is an explanation and clarification of it. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said, "I have left among you two things. You will not go astray as long as you hold fast to them, the Book of God and my Sunnah." As the transmission moved away from the time of the Rashidun state, there arose a need to establish Quranic interpretations and to document Hadith for fear of their loss. Then there was a need to know the chains of narration and to evaluate the transmitters to distinguish between the authentic and the less so. Subsequently, the extraction of rulings from the book and the Sunnah increased, and with that, the language deteriorated, necessitating the establishment of grammatical rules. All religious sciences became skills in deductions, extractions, theorizing, and analogies, and they required other sciences as means for them, such as knowledge of the laws of Arabic and the laws of deduction and analogy, and defending faith-based beliefs with evidence due to the prevalence of innovations and heresies. Thus, all these sciences became fields of knowledge requiring education, and they were included among the crafts. We had previously stated that crafts are associated with urban life, and that the Arabs were the farthest from them, so the sciences became urban, and the Arabs distanced themselves from them and from their markets. The urban people at that time were the non-Arabs, or those similar to them among the freedmen, and the people of the cities, who were then followers of the non-Arabs in civilization and its crafts, because they were more adept at it due to the established civilization among them since the time of the Persians. The masters of the craft of grammar, such as Sibawayh, the Persian, and Al-Zajjaj, were all non-Arabs by lineage. They were raised in the Arabic language, acquiring it through upbringing and mingling with the Arabs, and they established it as rules and an art for those who came after them. Likewise, the bearers of Hadith, who preserved it from the people of Islam, were mostly non-Arabs or Arabized in language and upbringing due to the expansion of the field in Iraq. All scholars of the principles of jurisprudence were non-Arabs, as was known, as well as the bearers of theological knowledge and most of the interpreters. Only the non-Arabs preserved and documented knowledge. The truth of the Prophet's saying, "If knowledge were to be suspended in the heavens, a people from Persia would attain it," became evident. As for the Arabs who experienced this civilization and its markets and emerged from nomadism, they were preoccupied with leadership in the Abbasid state and what they were compelled to do in terms of governance, which distracted them from pursuing knowledge and contemplating it. They were the people of the state and its protectors, and the ones in charge of its governance, along with their sense of pride that prevented them from pursuing knowledge at that time, as it had become part of the crafts. Leaders have always been reluctant to engage in crafts and professions, and what leads to them, delegating that to those who undertook it from the non-Arabs and the mixed bloods. They continue to see it as their right to engage in it, as it is their religion and their sciences, and they did not hold the bearers of knowledge in contempt. Until the matter completely shifted from the Arabs and became the domain of the non-Arabs, the religious sciences became strange in relation to the people of power due to their distance from their lineage, and they belittled their bearers, seeing them as distant from them, preoccupied with what does not benefit or serve them in governance and politics, as we mentioned in the transmission of religious ranks. This is the reason we have established that the bearers of the Sharia, or the majority of them, are non-Arabs. As for rational sciences, they did not emerge in the community until after the bearers of knowledge and their authors distinguished themselves. All knowledge became a craft, specialized among the non-Arabs, while the Arabs abandoned it and turned away from pursuing it, so it was only carried by the Arabized non-Arabs, as we mentioned earlier. This continued in the Islamic cities as long as civilization was in the non-Arabs and their lands of Iraq, Khorasan, and beyond the river. When those cities were destroyed, and the civilization that is the secret of God in acquiring knowledge and crafts disappeared from them, knowledge completely left the non-Arabs due to the nomadism that encompassed them, and knowledge became confined to the cities that were flourishing with civilization. Today, there is no place more flourishing in civilization than Egypt. It is the mother of the world, the abode of Islam, and the fountain of knowledge and crafts. Some civilization remained in the lands beyond the river due to the civilization of the state there, so they have a share of knowledge and crafts that cannot be denied. This was indicated by the words of some of their scholars from works that have reached us in these lands, such as Sa'd al-Din al-Taftazani. As for other non-Arabs, we have not seen any significant contributions from them after Imam Ibn al-Khatib and Nasir al-Din al-Tusi that can be relied upon for their accuracy. Consider this and reflect upon it. It is indeed astonishing in the conditions of creation. And God creates what he wills. He has no partner in sovereignty, and to him belongs all praise, and he is capable of all things. And sufficient for us is God, and he is the best disposer of affairs, and all praise is due to God.
Chapter 44.
Regarding the fact that if foreignness precedes the tongue, it limits its owner in acquiring knowledge from the people of the Arabic language. The reason for this is that the discussions of all sciences are essentially about mental and imaginative meanings among the religious sciences, most of which are concerned with words and their content derived from the rulings received from the Book and the Sunnah and their languages that convey them, all of which are in the realm of imagination and among the intellectual sciences, which are in the mind. Languages are merely interpreters of what is in the minds regarding those meanings, conveyed from one to another through verbal communication, debate, and teaching, and through practicing research in sciences to acquire their faculties through prolonged training in that. Words and languages are intermediaries and veils between the minds, and connections and conclusions between meanings. It is essential in acquiring those minds' meanings to have their words to understand their linguistic implications and the quality of the faculty for the observer in it. Otherwise, it would be difficult to capture them beyond what is in their mental discussions from the complexities. If his faculty in those implications is firmly established, such that meanings readily come to his mind from those words through their usage, as is natural and innate, that veil is generally removed between meanings and understanding or diminished, and only the struggle with what is in the meanings of the discussions remains. This is all if the teachings are received through direct instruction and verbal expression. However, if the learner needs to study and refer to the book and engage with the written forms from the records on the issues of sciences, there is another veil between the script and its forms in the book, and between the words expressed in imagination, because the forms of the book have a specific indication on the expressed words. If that indication is not known, understanding the expression becomes difficult, and if it is known with a limited faculty, its understanding is also limited, and an additional veil is added for the observer and the learner between him and his goal of acquiring the faculties of sciences, which is more challenging than the first veil. If his faculty in verbal and written indications is strong, the veils between him and the meanings are lifted, and he only struggles to understand its discussions. This is the nature of meanings with words and writing concerning every language. Learners, therefore, in their youth, are more firmly established in their faculties. Then, when the Islamic nation expanded its dominion and incorporated nations within it, and studied the sciences of the ancients through its prophethood and its book, and was characterized by illiteracy and insignia, the kingdom and dignity were taken, and the nations were subjected to them through civilization and refinement, and they turned their religious sciences into a craft, after they had been mere transmission, thus developing faculties within them, and the records and compositions multiplied, and they sought the sciences of nations, translating them into their sciences, and pouring them into the mold of their perspectives, stripping them from those foreign languages to their tongue, and enhancing them in their understanding, while those records that reached them in foreign languages became forgotten and abandoned and scattered dust. All sciences became in the Arabic language, and their records were inscribed in their script, and those engaged in sciences needed to know the verbal and written indications in their language rather than in other tongues, due to the decline in their study and care for them. It has been established that language is a faculty of the tongue, and likewise, writing is a craft of the hand. If the faculty of foreignness precedes in the tongue, it becomes deficient in the Arabic language, for the reason we presented, that if a faculty precedes in a craft in a place, it is rare for its owner to excel in another craft, which is evident. If he is deficient in the Arabic language and its verbal and written indications, it becomes difficult for him to understand meanings from it as mentioned. Unless the previous faculty of foreignness was not firmly established when he transitioned to Arabic, like the younger children of foreigners who grow up with Arabs before their foreignness becomes established. Thus, the Arabic language would seem as if it were prior to them, and they would not have any deficiency in understanding meanings from Arabic. The same applies to those who learned foreign writing before Arabic. This is why we find many scholars of foreigners in their lessons and teaching sessions prefer to read interpretations from books rather than reciting them aloud, thereby alleviating some of the burdens of veils to make it easier for them to grasp meanings. A person with mastery in expression and writing is self-sufficient in that, with complete mastery, and if he has understanding of sayings from writing, and meanings from sayings like innate nature, the veils between him and the meanings are lifted. Sometimes, diligence in teaching and practicing the language, and practicing writing, may lead to the establishment of the faculty, as we find in many scholars of foreigners, although it is rare. If compared to their counterparts among Arab scholars and their peers, the Arabs have a longer reach and a stronger faculty, due to the lethargy of the foreigner from the previous foreignness that necessarily affects deficiency. And this does not contradict the fact that most scholars of Islam are foreigners, because the foreigners referred to there are those of foreign descent, due to the circulation of civilization among them, which we established as a reason for adopting crafts and faculties, including sciences. As for the foreignness of the language, it is not from that, and is what is meant here. Nor does it contradict what the Greeks had in their sciences of deep-rootedness, for they learned it from their previous language, and their commonly recognized script among them. The foreigner who learns knowledge in the Islamic nation acquires knowledge without the tongue that he previously had, and without the script that he knows his faculty in. Therefore, this becomes a veil for him, as we mentioned. This is general among all types of foreign language speakers, including Persians, Romans, Turks, Berbers, and Franks, and all others who are not of the Arabic tongue. In that are signs for those who reflect. Chapter 45. In the sciences of the Arabic tongue, its pillars are four: language, grammar, rhetoric, and literature. Knowledge of these is essential for the people of Sharia, as the source of all legal rulings is in the book and the Sunnah, which are in the Arabic language. The narrators from the companions and the followers were Arabs, and the explanation of its complexities comes from their languages. Therefore, it is necessary to know the sciences related to this tongue for anyone who seeks knowledge of Sharia. The importance of these sciences varies according to their levels in fulfilling the intended meaning of speech, as will be clarified in discussing each one. What is concluded is that the most important among them is grammar, as it clarifies the foundations of intentions through indication, distinguishing the subject from the object and the subject from the predicate. Without it, the essence of conveying meaning would be lost. Linguistics should have precedence, were it not for the fact that most of its structures remain unchanged in their subjects, unlike the inflection that indicates the relationship between the subject and the predicate, which has changed significantly and no longer retains its trace. Therefore, grammar is more important than linguistics, as ignorance of it leads to a complete breakdown in understanding, which is not the case with linguistics. And God, the Most High, knows best, and may He grant success. The science of grammar. Know that language, in common understanding, is the expression of the speaker about their intent. That expression is a linguistic act arising from the intention to convey meaning, so it must become a settled skill in the organ that performs it, which is the tongue, and it varies in every nation according to their conventions. The skill that the Arabs possess in this regard is the best and clearest in expressing intentions, as it indicates many meanings beyond the words themselves. For example, the movements that distinguish the subject from the object, and the genitive, meaning the added noun, and the letters that lead the actions, that is, the movements, to the entities, without the need for other specific words. This is found only in the Arabic language. As for other languages, every meaning or state requires specific words to indicate it, which is why we find the speech of non-Arabs in their conversations longer than what you would estimate in Arabic. This is the meaning of his saying, "Peace be upon him. I was given the concise speech, and my speech was shortened." Thus, letters in their language, and movements and forms, have significance in indicating the intended meaning without the need for a crafted art from which they benefit. It is merely a skill in their tongues that one learns from another, just as our children learn our languages today. When Islam came and they left the Hijaz to seek the kingship that was in the hands of nations and states and mingled with the masses, that skill changed due to what was heard from the deviations of those who were Arabized. Hearing is the father of linguistic skills, so it became corrupted by what was introduced to it that contradicted it, due to its inclination towards habitual hearing. The scholars among them feared that this skill would be completely corrupted, and that a long time would pass without it, leading to the Quran and Hadith becoming closed off from understanding. Therefore, they derived from the patterns of their speech laws for that skill, similar to general principles and rules, to which they could apply all types of speech and associate similarities with similarities, such as that the subject is in the nominative case, the object is in the accusative case, and the subject is in the nominative case. Then they noticed that the indication changes with the change of the movements of these words, so they agreed to call it i'rab, grammatical inflection, and named the cause of that change a factor and similar terms. All of these became specific terminologies for them, so they recorded them in books and made it a craft specific to them. They agreed to call it the science of grammar. The first to write about it was Abu al-Aswad al-Du'ali from the Banu Kinana, and it is said that it was at the suggestion of Ali, may God be pleased with him, because he saw the change in the skill and advised him to preserve it, so he was alarmed to regulate it with the present laws derived from observation. Then people wrote about it after him, until it reached al-Khalil ibn Ahmad al-Farahidi during the time of al-Rashid, when people were most in need of it due to the loss of that skill among the Arabs. He refined the craft and completed its chapters. Sibawayh took it from him and completed its branches, increasing its evidence and examples, and wrote his famous book, which became a reference for everything written about it afterward. Then Abu Ali al-Farisi and Abu al-Qasim al-Zajjaj wrote concise books for learners, following the Imam in his book. The discussion in this craft became lengthy, and disagreements arose among its scholars in Kufa and Basra, the two ancient cities of the Arabs. The evidence and arguments among them multiplied, and the methods of teaching varied, leading to significant differences in the grammatical analysis of many verses of the Quran, due to their differing views on those rules, which prolonged the matter for learners. Later scholars came with their own methodologies in summarization, shortening much of that length while encompassing all that was transmitted, as Ibn Malik did in his book Al-Tahsil and similar works, or limiting themselves to the basics for learners, as Al-Zamakhshari did in Al-Mufassal and Ibn al-Hajib in his introduction. They sometimes organized it in verse form, like Ibn Malik in his two long poems and Ibn Mati in the 1,000-verse poem. In summary, the writings in this field are more than can be counted or encompassed, and the methods of teaching in it are diverse. The approach of the early scholars differs from that of the later ones. The Kufans, Basrans, Baghdadis, and Andalusians also have different methods. This craft was on the verge of decline due to the observed deficiency in all sciences and crafts with the decline of civilization. A compilation reached us from Morocco in these times, attributed to Jamal al-Din ibn Hisham, one of its scholars, in which he summarized the rules of grammatical inflection in general and detail. He discussed letters, vocabulary, and sentences, omitting what was repetitive in most of its chapters, and named it Al-Mughni fi al-Irab, the enricher in grammatical inflection. He pointed out all the nuances of the grammatical analysis of the Quran and organized them into chapters, sections, and rules that encompassed them all. We found ourselves in possession of a vast knowledge that attests to his high status in this craft and his abundant expertise in it, as if he were following the path of the people of Mosul, who followed the footsteps of Ibn Jinni and adhered to the terminology of his teaching, producing something remarkable that indicates the strength of his skill and knowledge. And God increases in creation what he wills. Linguistics is the science that explains linguistic subjects. When the mastery of the Arabic tongue deteriorated in the movements known among grammarians as inflection, rules were derived to preserve it, as we mentioned. This deterioration continued due to the mingling with non-Arabs, leading to a corruption of the meanings of words, as much of the Arabic language was used in contexts that were not appropriate for it, swayed by the jargon of Arabized foreigners with their terminologies that contradicted pure Arabic. Thus, it became necessary to preserve linguistic subjects through writing and documentation to prevent loss and the resulting ignorance of the Quran and Hadith. Many scholars of language endeavored in this and compiled books on the subject. The pioneer in this field was Al-Khalil ibn Ahmad al-Farahidi, who authored the book Al-Ain, in which he categorized all combinations of foreign letters into dual, triad, quadrilateral, and pentagonal forms, which is the limit of combinations in the Arabic tongue. He managed to categorize this in various ways, noting that the total number of dual words arises from all numbers sequentially from 1 to 27, which is one less than the total letters of the foreign alphabet. This is because each letter can be combined with each of the 27 letters, resulting in 27 dual words. The second letter is then combined with the remaining 26, and so forth. The 27th letter is combined with the 28th, resulting in a total that follows the sequence from 1 to 27, which is summed up using the known method in arithmetic, adding the first and last numbers and multiplying the sum by half the count. This is then doubled for the sake of reversing the dual, as the order of letters is significant in combinations, resulting in the total of duals. Triads are derived from the number of duals by summing from 1 to 26 sequentially, as each dual increases by one letter to form a triad. Thus, duals are treated as a single letter combined with each of the remaining letters, which are 26 after the dual, summed from 1 to 26 sequentially, and multiplied by the total number of duals. The result is then multiplied by 6, yielding the total combinations of triads from foreign letters. The same applies to quadrilaterals and pentagons. He categorized these combinations in this manner and organized his chapters according to the foreign letters in the commonly accepted order, relying on the articulation points, starting with the throat letters, followed by the palate letters, then the molars, then the lips, and finally the vowels, which are the airy letters. He began with the throat letter Ain, because it is the shortest, hence he named his book Al-Ain, as the ancients often named their works after the first word or term they contained. He then distinguished between the unused and the used, noting that the unused in quadrilaterals and pentagons was more due to the Arabs' infrequent use of them because of their heaviness, and the duals were similarly less common due to their limited usage, while the triads were more prevalent, leading to more established forms. Al-Khalil encompassed all of this in Al-Ain, absorbing it thoroughly. Then came Abu Bakr al-Zubaydi, who wrote for Hisham al-Muwayyad in Andalusia in the 4th century, summarizing it while maintaining comprehensiveness, omitting all unused terms and many examples of the used, and condensing it for easier memorization. Al-Jahiz from the East authored Al-Sihah, in the commonly accepted order of foreign letters, starting with the Hamza and organizing the translation by the last letter of the word, as people often refer to the ends of words, creating a section for that. He then presented the letters at the beginning of the word in the order of foreign letters and translated them by sections until the end. He limited the language following Al-Khalil's categorization. Then, Ibn Sidah from the Andalusians, in the state of Ali ibn Mujahid, authored Al-Muhkam, following that approach of comprehensiveness and in a manner similar to Al-Ain. He added discussions on word derivations and forms, resulting in one of the finest compilations. Muhammad ibn Abi al-Hussein, a companion of al-Mustansir from the Hafsid dynasty in Tunisia, summarized it and rearranged it according to the order of Al-Sihah, considering the ends of words and building translations upon them, making them like twins from the same womb and offspring of the same father. Among the scholars of language are Al-Munjid, Ibn Durayd's Al-Jamhara, and Ibn al-Ambari's Al-Zahir. These are the foundational texts of linguistics as we know them. There are also other summaries specific to certain types of words and covering some or all sections. However, the method of categorization in them is obscure, while the categorization in those is clear from the combinations, as you have seen. Among the books also established in linguistics is al-Zamakhshari's book on metaphor, titled Asas al-Balagha, in which he explained everything that the Arabs have used metaphorically in terms of words and meanings, and it is a valuable book for understanding. When the Arabs would use a term generally, and then apply other specific terms for particular matters, it necessitated a nuanced understanding of language, as the term white was generally applied to anything white, but specific terms arose for white horses, ashhab, for humans, ajar, and for sheep, amla, leading to the term white being misused in these contexts, deviating from the Arabic tongue. Al-Thalibi specialized in this area and dedicated a book to it titled Fiqh al-Lugha, emphasizing that a linguist must not distort the usage of Arabic from its proper contexts. Thus, knowing the original meaning is not sufficient for categorization unless it is supported by the usage of the Arabs. Most in need of this are writers in both poetry and prose, to avoid excessive errors in linguistic subjects in their vocabulary and structures, which is more severe than errors in inflection and more egregious. Similarly, some later scholars authored works on shared terms and took it upon themselves to categorize them. Even if they did not reach completeness in that, they covered most of it. As for the existing summaries in this specific field, which are focused on commonly used language for easier memorization for students, there are many, such as the terms of Ibn al-Sakait and al-Fasih by Tha'alab, among others. Some are less comprehensive than others, due to differing views on what is most important for students to memorize. And God is the Creator, the All-Knowing. There is no Lord but Him. Section. Know that the transmission by which language is established is merely the transmission from the Arabs that they used these words for these meanings. Do not say they coined them, for that is difficult and far-fetched, and no one has known of it. Likewise, languages cannot be established by analogy for what we do not know its usage, as is known for the usage of water of grapes, considering the common intoxication. For the testimony of analogy in the realm of comparison can only be understood through the law that indicates the validity of the analogy from its origin. We have no equivalent in language except through reason, which is sound, and this is the view of the majority of scholars. Although some, like Al-Qadi and Ibn Sarih, lean towards analogy in it, the argument against it is stronger. Do not assume that establishing language in the realm of verbal definitions is valid, for the definition pertains to meanings, clarifying that the meaning of the unknown, hidden word, is the same as that of the clear, well-known one, and language establishes that the word is such, for such a meaning, and the difference is very clear.
The science of rhetoric
is a recent addition to the faith after the science of Arabic and language, and it is one of the linguistic sciences because it is related to words and what they convey. It aims to indicate meanings as the matters that the speaker intends to convey to the listener through his speech are either the conceptualization of singularities that are subject and predicate and lead to one another, indicated by the singularities of names, verbs and letters, or distinguishing predicates from subjects and times, indicated by changes in movements from grammatical inflection and the structures of words. All of these are the craft of grammar. Remaining are the matters surrounding occurrences that require indication, such as the states of the interlocutors or the actors, and what the state of the action necessitates, which needs to be indicated because it is part of complete communication. If the speaker achieves this, he has reached the utmost in conveying his message. If it does not include any of these, it is not of the nature of Arabic speech, for their speech is vast, and for every situation, there is a specific expression that is unique to it after the perfection of grammatical inflection and clarity. Do you not see that their saying Zayd came to me differs from saying came to me Zayd, because the former emphasizes the coming before the person to whom it is attributed, while the latter emphasizes the person before the coming. Likewise, expressing parts of the sentence in a manner suitable for the context, whether it be a relative, ambiguous, or definite term. Similarly, affirming the attribution in the sentence, such as saying Zayd is standing, that Zayd is standing, and indeed Zayd is standing, all differ in meaning, even if they are equal in terms of grammatical inflection. The first, devoid of emphasis, conveys a neutral mind. The second, emphasized by that, conveys hesitation, and the third conveys denial. Thus, they are different. Likewise, you might say, a man came to me, and then say in its place, a man came to me, if you intended to emphasize his significance, indicating that he is a man unmatched by others. Then, the attributive sentence can be informative, which has an external reality that corresponds to it, or it can be performative, which has no external reality, such as requests and their types. The conjunction may be omitted between two sentences if the second has a grammatical position, thus sharing the status of a singular dependent noun, an adjective, or an affirmation without conjunction, or conjunction may be necessary if the second has no grammatical position. The context may require elaboration or brevity, leading to the formulation of speech accordingly. The expression may indicate something without intending its literal meaning, but rather its necessary implication, as when you say, Zayd is a lion, you do not mean the literal lion, but rather his bravery, which you attribute to Zayd, and this is called a metaphor. You may also intend by a compound expression to indicate its necessary implication, as when you say, Zayd has much ash, intending what follows from it in terms of generosity and hospitality, since the abundance of ash arises from both. All of these are additional indications beyond the meanings of the words, whether singular or compound, and they are merely forms and states of occurrences that have been designated for indication through forms and states in words, each according to what its context necessitates. This science, called rhetoric, encompasses the study of these indications that pertain to forms, states, and contexts, and it is divided into three categories. The first category examines these forms and states that correspond with the words to all the requirements of the situation and is called the science of eloquence. The second category examines the indication of the necessary verbal implications and their implications, which are metaphor and metonymy, as we have mentioned, and is called the science of rhetoric. They also added a third category, which is the consideration of embellishing speech and improving it through a type of ornamentation, either through parallelism or alliteration, creating similarity between its words, or through embellishment that interrupts, or through ambiguity about the intended meaning, by suggesting a hidden meaning due to the shared wording between them, and similar matters, which they call the science of embellishment. The three categories are collectively referred to by modern scholars as rhetoric, which is the name of the second category, as the ancients were the first to discuss it, and then the issues of the art followed one after another, with writings by Ja'far ibn Yahya, Al-Jahiz, Qudama, and others, which were not comprehensive. The issues of the art continued to be refined gradually until Al-Sakaki distilled its essence and refined its topics, organizing its chapters in the manner we mentioned earlier, and authored his book titled The Key in Grammar, Morphology, and Rhetoric, making this art part of some of its components. Later scholars took from his book and summarized the main principles for the current era, as Al-Sakaki did in his book The Clarification, Ibn Malik in The Lamp, and Jalal al-Din al-Qazwini in The Elucidation, which is smaller in size than The Elucidation, and its attention in this era among the people of the East in explanation and teaching is greater than others. In summary, the people of the East are more proficient in this art than those of the West, and the reason, and God knows best, is that it is a complement to linguistic sciences, and the arts of perfection exist in abundance in prosperous civilizations. The East is more prosperous than the West, as we mentioned, or we may say due to the attention of non-Arabs, who are the majority in the East, such as al-Zamakhshari's interpretation, which is entirely based on this art and is its origin. The people of the West have specifically specialized in the category of embellishment, making it part of the literary sciences of poetry, assigning titles to it, counting its chapters, and categorizing its types. They claim to have enumerated them from the Arabic language, driven by their passion for embellishing words, while the art of eloquence and rhetoric is more complex and difficult to grasp due to the intricacies of their perspectives and the obscurity of their meanings, leading them to shy away from them. Among those who authored works on embellishment from Africa is Ibn Rashid, and his book The Essentials is well known. Many from Africa and Andalusia followed his approach. Know that the fruit of this art lies in understanding the miraculous nature of the Quran, for its miracle lies in the fulfillment of its indications of all the requirements of the situations, both stated and understood, which is the highest level of perfection, along with the speech concerning the selection of words and the quality of their arrangement and composition. This is the miracle that minds fall short of grasping, and only those with a taste for the Arabic language and mastery of it can perceive its miracle to the extent of their taste. This is why the perceptions of the Arabs who heard it from its source are at a higher level in this regard, as they are the knights of speech and its experts, and their taste is more abundant and accurate. The interpreters are in most need of this art, and many of the interpretations of the ancients overlooked it until al-Zamakhshari appeared, authoring his book on interpretation and examining the verses of the Quran with the principles of this art, revealing some of its miraculous aspects, thus distinguishing this section from all interpretations, were it not for the fact that it supports the beliefs of the people of innovation when they derive them from the Quran through rhetorical means. For this reason, many of the people of the Sunnah avoid it, despite its abundant rhetorical content. Whoever firmly establishes the beliefs of the Sunnah and participates in this art to some extent, so that he can respond to it in the manner of its speech or knows it to be an innovation, he will turn away from it, and it will not harm his belief. It is necessary for him to examine this book to gain some understanding of the miraculous nature while remaining safe from innovations and whims, and God is the guide for whom he wills to the straight path. The science of literature has no specific place to examine the affirmation or denial of its attributes. Rather, the aim of it, according to the people of language, is its fruit, which is proficiency in the arts of poetry and prose, following the styles and manners of the Arabs. They gather for this purpose from the speech of the Arabs what might yield a word, including high-quality poetry, equally balanced prose, and scattered issues of language and grammar throughout, from which the observer can generally deduce most of the rules of Arabic, along with mentioning some of the days of the Arabs to understand what occurs in their poetry. Likewise, it includes important mentions of famous lineages and general news. The goal of all this is that nothing from the speech of the Arabs and their styles and rhetorical methods remains hidden from the observer when he reviews it, for mastery cannot be achieved through mere memorization without understanding, thus necessitating the presentation of everything that is essential for comprehension. Then, when they want to define this art, they say, literature is the preservation of the poetry and news of the Arabs, and taking from every science a portion, referring to the sciences of language or religious sciences only in terms of their texts, which are the Quran and Hadith. There is no entry for other sciences into the speech of the Arabs, except for what later scholars have pursued regarding the art of rhetoric in their poetry and their use of scientific terminologies, which then required the practitioner of this art to know the terminologies of the sciences to be able to understand them. We have heard from our teachers in educational gatherings that the foundations and pillars of this art are four main texts: Adab al-Khatib by Ibn Qutayba, Al-Kamil by Al-Mubarrad, Al-Bayan wal-Tabin by Al-Jahiz, and Al-Nawadir by Abu Ali al-Qali al-Baghdadi. Anything beyond these four is subsidiary to them and branches from them. There are many writings by modern scholars on this subject. Singing was initially part of this art, as it is a derivative of poetry, since singing is merely its melody. The scholars and distinguished individuals of the Abbasid state devoted themselves to it, eager to acquire the styles and arts of poetry, and it was not considered a defect in justice and nobility. Al-Qadi Abu al-Faraj al-Isbahani authored his book on songs, in which he compiled the news, poetry, lineages, days, and state of the Arabs. He based it on the songs in the 100 melodies chosen by the singers for al-Rashid, and he comprehensively covered that. Indeed, it is the anthology of the Arabs and a collection of the scattered virtues that have preceded them in every art of poetry, history, singing, and other matters, and no book in this regard is comparable to it, as far as we know, and it is the ultimate goal that the literati aspire to and stand at, and how can one attain it? Now we will return to a thorough investigation of the general topics we have discussed regarding the sciences of language, and God is the guide to the right path. Chapter 46. On language as an artificial faculty. Know that all languages are faculties similar to an art, as they are faculties of the tongue for expressing meanings and their quality and conception according to the completeness or deficiency of the faculty. This is not in regard to vocabulary, but rather in regard to structures. When the complete faculty is achieved in the arrangement of individual words to express the intended meanings and to consider the composition that aligns speech with the requirements of the situation, the speaker then reaches the goal of conveying his intent to the listener, and this is the meaning of eloquence. Faculties are only acquired through the repetition of actions, as the action occurs first, and a quality is then acquired by the self, which is repeated until it becomes a state. The meaning of a state is that it is a quality that is not firmly established, and then with increased repetition, it becomes a faculty, meaning a firmly established quality. When the speaker from the Arabs had the faculty of the Arabic language present in them, he would hear the speech of his contemporaries and their styles in their communications and how they express their intentions, just as a child hears the use of vocabulary in its meanings and learns it first, then hears the structures afterward and learns them as well. Their hearing of this continues to renew at every moment and from every speaker, and its use is repeated until it establishes that faculty and quality firmly, making him like one of them. Thus, tongues and languages have passed from generation to generation, and the non-Arabs and children have learned them. This is the meaning of what the common people say, that language is natural for the Arabs, meaning the first faculty that was taken from them and not acquired from others. However, when this faculty deteriorated due to their mingling with non-Arabs, the reason for its corruption was that the emerging generation began to hear ways of expressing intentions that were different from the ways that the Arabs had, distinguishing their intent due to the multitude of non-Arabs mingling with the Arabs. And they also heard the ways of the Arabs, so the matter became mixed for them, and they took from both, thus creating a new faculty that was deficient compared to the first. This is the meaning of the corruption of the Arabic tongue. For this reason, the language of Quraysh was the most eloquent and clear of the Arabic languages due to their distance from the lands of non-Arabs in all directions. Then those who surrounded them from Thaqif, Hudayl, Quza'a, Banu Kinana, Ghatafan, Banu Asad, and Banu Tamim. As for those who were farther from them, such as Rabi'a, Lachm, Judham, Ghassan, Iyad, Quda'a, and the Arabs of Yemen, who were adjacent to the nations of Persia, Rome, and Abyssinia, their language was not fully developed due to mingling with non-Arabs. According to their distance from Quraysh, the validity and corruption of their languages were judged by the people of Arabic linguistics. And God, the Exalted and Almighty, knows best, and to him belongs success. Chapter 47. Regarding the fact that the Arabic language of this era is independent and distinct from the language of Egypt and Himyar, we find it in the clarity of intentions and the fulfillment of indications on the norms of the Mudar tongue. The only thing lost from it is the indication of movements on the specification of the subject from the object, which they compensated for through precedence and postponement, and by contextual clues that indicate the specifics of intentions. However, the clarity and eloquence in the Mudar tongue are greater and more established, as the words themselves indicate the meanings precisely. The conditions that necessitate the situation, referred to as the context of the situation, require indications. Every meaning must be surrounded by specific conditions, and those conditions must be considered in conveying the intended purpose, as they are its attributes. These conditions in all languages are most often indicated by words specific to them by convention. In the Arabic tongue, however, they are indicated by conditions and methods in the arrangements of words and their composition through precedence, postponement, omission, or grammatical movements. They may also be indicated by non-independent letters. Therefore, the levels of speech in the Arabic tongue vary according to the variation in indications of those methods, as we have previously mentioned, making Arabic speech more concise and with fewer words and expressions than all other languages. This is the meaning of the saying of the Prophet, peace be upon him. I was given the concise words, and my speech was shortened. Consider this in light of what is narrated about Isa ibn Umar, who was told by some grammarians, I find repetition in the speech of the Arabs, such as Zayd is standing, and indeed Zayd is standing, and indeed Zayd is surely standing, and the meaning is the same. He replied, the meanings are different. The first is to inform the empty-minded of Zayd's standing. The second is for someone who heard it and hesitated about it, and the third is for someone who is known for insisting on denying it. Thus, the indication varies with the variation of conditions. This eloquence and clarity have always been the hallmark of the Arabs and their method to this day. Do not pay attention to the ramblings of the grammarians, the people of the limited craft of grammar, whose understanding is deficient regarding the truth, as they claim that eloquence has vanished in this era and that the Arabic tongue has deteriorated, based on the corruption that has occurred in the endings of words due to the study of its laws. This is a statement that has been instilled by sectarianism in their nature and has been cast into their hearts due to their shortcomings. Otherwise, we find today many Arabic words that remain in their original contexts, and the expression of intentions and cooperation in it, with varying clarity, exists in their speech to this day, and the styles and arts of the tongue, both in poetry and prose, are present in their communications, and the understanding of the eloquent speaker in their gatherings and assemblies, and the brilliant poet in the styles of their language. The correct taste and sound nature bear witness to this. The only thing lost from the documented conditions of the tongue is the grammatical movements at the ends of words, which have adhered to the Mudar tongue in a single well-known method, which is grammar. This is part of the rules of the tongue. The attention given to the Mudar tongue arose because of the corruption that occurred due to their mingling with non-Arabs when they took over the kingdoms of Iraq, Syria, Egypt, and the Maghreb, and its form changed from what it was initially, becoming another language. The Quran was revealed in it, and the prophetic hadith was transmitted in its language, and they are the foundation of religion and creed. So there was a fear of forgetting them, and the minds closing off from them, due to the loss of the tongue in which they were revealed, necessitating the documentation of its rules, the establishment of its standards, and the derivation of its laws. It became a science with chapters, sections, introductions, and issues, which its people named the science of grammar and the craft of Arabic, thus becoming a preserved art and a written science, a means to understand the Book of God and the Sunnah of his Messenger, peace be upon him, adequately. Perhaps if we were to pay attention to this Arabic tongue of this era and establish its rules, we could compensate for the grammatical movements in their indications with other matters inherent in it that would serve as its specific laws. Perhaps they would be in its endings in a manner different from the original method in the Muda language, as languages and their characteristics are not arbitrary. The Muda tongue and the Himyari tongue were in this state, and many of the topics of the Himyari tongue and the variations of its words changed among the Muda. The existing evidence contradicts those who, due to their limitations, claim that they are one language and seek to apply the Himyari language to the standards and laws of the Muda language, as some claim in deriving the term keel in the Himyari tongue from saying, and many similar claims, which are not correct. The Himyari language is another language distinct from the Muda language in many of its structures, variations, and grammatical movements, just as the Arabic language of our time is distinct from the Muda language. However, the attention to the Muda tongue is due to the Sharia, as we said, which led to derivation and induction, and we do not have at this time anything that compels us to such a thing or calls us to it. Among what has occurred in the language of this Arab generation of this era, where they were from different regions, is their manner of pronouncing the kaf. They do not pronounce it from the articulation point of the kaf, as known among the people of the cities, as mentioned in the Arabic books, which is from the farthest part of the tongue and above it from the upper palate. They also do not pronounce it from the articulation point of the kaf, even though it is lower than the position of the qaf, and what follows it from the upper palate. Rather, they come with it in a position between the kaf and the qaf, which is present among the entire generation, whether they are from the west or the east, until it became a distinguishing mark for them among nations and generations, unique to them, with no one else sharing it. So much so that anyone who wishes to get close and affiliate with the generation and enter it mimics them in pronouncing it. They believe that this is how the clear Arab is distinguished from the foreigner in Arabness and urbanity, by pronouncing this kaf. This shows that it is the Muda language itself, as most of this remaining generation and their leaders, both east and west, are from the descendants of Mansur ibn Ikrimah, ibn Khasifa, ibn Qais ibn Ilan, from Sulaym ibn Mansur, and from Banu Amir ibn Sa'sa'a, ibn Muawiyah, ibn Bakr, ibn Hawazin, ibn Mansur. They are, to this day, the most populous nation in the inhabited world, and the majority of them are from the descendants of Muda, and the rest of the generation with them are from Banu Kaylan, in pronouncing this kaf as well. This language was not invented by this generation. Rather, it has been inherited among them successively, indicating that it is the language of the early Muda, and perhaps it is the language of the Prophet, peace be upon him, itself, as the scholars of the Ahl al-Bayt have claimed, asserting that whoever reads in the opening of the book, guide us to the straight path, without the kaf of this generation, has made a mistake and invalidated his prayer. I do not know where this came from, for the language of the people of the cities has also not been newly created. Rather, they have transmitted it from their ancestors, and most of them are from Muda, since they settled in the cities after the conquest. The people of the generation have also not newly created it, but they are further removed from mingling with non-Arabs than the people of the cities. This supports what exists of the language among them as being from the language of their ancestors. This is with the agreement of all the people of the generation, both east and west, in pronouncing it, and it is the characteristic that distinguishes the Arab from the mixed and urban. It appears that this qaf, pronounced by the Arab Bedouin generation, is from the articulation point of the qaf among their early language speakers, and that the articulation point of the qaf is broad, with its beginning from the upper palate and its end near the kaf. Thus, pronouncing it from the upper palate is the language of the people of the cities, while pronouncing it from near the kaf is the language of this Bedouin generation. This refutes what the Ahl al-Bayt have said about the invalidation of prayer by omitting it in the opening of the book, as all the scholars of the cities disagree with that. It is unlikely that they would have neglected it. The explanation is, as we have said. Yes, we say that the more likely and preferable is what is pronounced by the Bedouin generation, as its continuity among them, as we have mentioned, is evidence that it is the language of the first generation of their ancestors, and that it is the language of the Prophet, peace be upon him. This is further supported by their assimilation of it into the kaf, due to the proximity of the articulation points. If it were as pronounced by the people of the cities from the origin of the palate, it would not be close in articulation to the kaf, and it would not be assimilated. Moreover, the people of Arabic have mentioned this kaf close to the kaf, which is pronounced by the Bedouin Arab generation of this era, and they have made it intermediate between the articulation points of the kaf and the kaf, considering it an independent letter, which is unlikely. It appears that it is from the last articulation of the qaf, due to its broadness, as we have said. Furthermore, they explicitly express their disdain and aversion to it, as if it has not been established among them that it is the language of the first generation. In what we have mentioned about the continuity of their pronunciation, as they have inherited it from their ancestors generation after generation, and that it is their specific emblem, is evidence that it is the language of that first generation and the language of the Prophet, peace be upon him, as previously stated. Some may claim that this kaf, pronounced by the people of the cities, is not from this letter, and that it has come from their mingling with non-Arabs, and that they pronounce it likewise, so it is not from the language of the Arabs. However, the more reasonable conclusion, as we have stated, is that they are one letter with a broad articulation. Understand that. And God is the guide and the clear. Chapter 48. Regarding the language of the people of cities and towns as a language distinct from the language of Muda. Know that the custom of communication in cities and among the people of towns is not the ancient language of Muda, nor the language of the current generation, but rather it is another language that stands on its own, far removed from the language of Muda and from the language of this current Arab generation that we are familiar with, and it is even further from the language of Muda. The fact that it is a language in its own right is evident from the differences within it that are considered mistakes by the standards of the scholars of grammar. Moreover, it varies according to the different cities in their terminologies. The language of the people of the East is somewhat different from that of the people of the West, as is the case with the people of Andalusia in relation to both of them, and each of them is able to convey their intentions and express what is in their hearts through their language. This is the essence of tongue and language. The lack of grammatical inflection does not harm them, as we have mentioned in the language of the Arabs of this era. As for it being further from the original tongue than the language of this generation, it is because the distance from the tongue is due to mingling with foreign languages. The more one mingles with foreigners, the further their language becomes from that original tongue, because mastery is acquired through education, as we have said. This mastery is a mixture of the original mastery that was for the Arabs and the second mastery that belongs to the foreigners. To the extent that they hear from foreigners and grow accustomed to it, they drift away from the original mastery. Consider this in the regions of Africa, the West, Andalusia, and the East. As for Africa and the West, the Arabs there mingled with the Berbers, who are foreigners, due to their abundant presence among them, and Muda and the current generation hardly ever lacked them. So foreign influence prevailed over the Arabic tongue that they had, resulting in a mixed language. The foreign influence is predominant there, as we have mentioned, so it is further from the original tongue. Similarly, in the East, when the Arabs dominated the nations of Persia and the Turks, they mingled with them, and their languages circulated among the laborers and the captives, who became servants and wet nurses, and their language deteriorated due to the corruption of mastery until it transformed into another language. The same applies to the people of Andalusia, with the foreigners from the Franks and others. Thus, all the people of the cities from these regions have a language that is specific to them, differing from the language of Muda, and also differing from one another, as we will mention, as if it were another language due to the firm establishment of its mastery in their generations. And God creates what he wills and decrees. The 49th chapter. On teaching the language of Muda. Know that the mastery of the Muda language in this era has diminished and deteriorated, and the language of all the people of this generation is different from the language of Muda, in which the Quran was revealed. Rather, it is another language mixed with foreign elements, as we have mentioned. However, since languages are skills, as previously stated, learning them is possible like other skills. The way to teach those who seek this skill and wish to acquire it is to engage themselves in memorizing their ancient speech that follows their styles from the Quran, Hadith, the words of the predecessors, and the dialogues of the great Arabs in their rhymes and poetry, as well as the words of the moderns in all their arts, until they reach a level of familiarity with their speech, both structured and unstructured, akin to someone who grew up among them and was taught to express their intentions. Then, they can express what is in their minds according to their phrases and the arrangement of their words, based on what they have absorbed and memorized from their styles and the order of their expressions. This mastery will develop through this memorization and usage, becoming more solid and powerful with their abundance. Additionally, one needs a sound disposition and a good understanding of the nuances of the Arabs and their styles in constructions, while considering the application between them and the requirements of situations. Taste witnesses this, and it arises from the relationship between this mastery and a sound disposition, as we will mention. The quality of the crafted speech, whether in verse or prose, depends on the amount memorized and the frequency of use. Whoever acquires these skills has attained the language of Mudar and is a discerning critic of its eloquence, and thus, this is how learning it should be. And God guides whom He wills by His grace and generosity.
Chapter 50.
Regarding the fact that the mastery of this tongue is not the craft of Arabic and is independent of it in education, the reason for this is that the craft of Arabic is merely the knowledge of the laws and specific measures of this mastery. It is knowledge of a method, not the method itself. Thus, it is not the mastery itself, but rather akin to someone who knows a craft theoretically without being able to practice it. For example, a person knowledgeable in sewing may not be skilled in expressing some of its types. Sewing is to insert the thread into the needle's eye, then pierce it into the fabric at the gathered point, and pull it out from the other side by a certain amount, then return it to where it started, and pull it out in front of its first exit at a distance between the two holes, and continue this until the end of the work, giving the appearance of stitching, securing, and opening, along with all types of sewing and its tasks. If asked to do this by hand, he would not be able to execute anything. Similarly, if a carpenter were asked about the details of cutting wood, he would say, "It is to place the saw on the head of the wood and hold one end while another holds the other end, and you alternate between you and the serrated edges cut what passes over them back and forth until reaching the end of the wood." Yet, if asked to perform this task, or any part of it, he would not be able to do it. Thus, knowledge of the laws of grammar is similar to this mastery itself. Knowledge of the laws of grammar is merely knowledge of how to work, not the work itself. Therefore, we find many experts in grammar and skilled in the craft of Arabic, well versed in those laws, when asked to write 2 lines to a brother or a loved one, or to complain about an injustice, or to express a purpose, they err in correctness and make many mistakes, failing to compose the speech and express the intended meaning according to the styles of the Arabic tongue. Likewise, we find many who excel in this mastery and are adept in both poetry and prose, yet they do not know how to distinguish the subject from the object, nor the nominative from the genitive, nor anything from the laws of the craft of Arabic. From this, it is learned that mastery is different from the craft of Arabic, and that it is generally independent of it. We may find some skilled in the craft of grammar who are aware of the state of this mastery, but this is rare and coincidental, and most often occurs among those who are familiar with Sibawayh's book. For he did not limit himself to the laws of grammar only, but filled his book with examples from the Arabs and evidence from their poetry and expressions, so there was a good portion of teaching this mastery in it. You find the one who dedicates himself to it and acquires it has obtained a line of the speech of the Arabs and has integrated it into his memory in its places and joints of his needs. He becomes aware of the mastery and thus completes its education, making him more effective in benefiting from it. Among those who are familiar with Sibawayh's book, some may overlook this and acquire knowledge of the tongue as a craft without attaining mastery. As for those who are familiar with the books of later scholars, which lack this, except for the grammatical laws stripped of the poetry and speech of the Arabs, they rarely perceive this mastery or pay attention to its importance, finding themselves believing they have attained a rank in the Arabic tongue, while they are the farthest from it. The scholars of the craft of Arabic in Andalusia and their teachers are closer to acquiring and teaching this mastery than others, as they rely on the evidence of the Arabs and their examples, and delve into many structures in their teaching sessions, allowing beginners to acquire much of the mastery during education. Thus their souls become inclined to acquire and accept it. As for others from the Maghreb, Africa, and others, they have treated the craft of Arabic as a science, focusing on research and disregarding the understanding of the speech of the Arabs, except when they interpret a witness or favor a doctrine based on mental necessity, not based on the structures and compositions of the tongue. Thus, the craft of Arabic has become as if it were among the laws of logical reasoning or dialectics, distancing itself from the aspects of the tongue and its mastery, and this has led its bearers in the cities and regions to be far from mastery in general, as if they do not consider the speech of the Arabs. This is only due to their deviation from researching the evidence of the tongue and its structures and distinguishing its styles, and their neglect of practice in this for the learner, which is the best way to benefit mastery in the tongue. Those laws are merely means for education, but they have applied them in a way contrary to their intended purpose, turning them into pure knowledge and distancing themselves from their fruits. It is learned from what we have established in this chapter that acquiring the mastery of the Arabic tongue is only through the abundance of memorization of the speech of the Arabs, until the model they wove their structures upon is imprinted in his imagination, allowing him to weave upon it, and thus be in the position of one who grew up with them and mingled with their expressions in their speech, until he attained the settled mastery in expressing the intended meanings in the manner of their speech. And God is the knower of all matters, and God knows the unseen.
Chapter 51.
On the interpretation of taste in the terminology of the people of rhetoric, and the clarification of its meaning, and the explanation that it does not occur for non-Arabs. Know that the term taste is used by those concerned with the arts of rhetoric, and its meaning is the attainment of the faculty of eloquence in speech. The interpretation of eloquence has been discussed, and it is the correspondence of speech to meaning in all its aspects, with specific characteristics that apply to structures in conveying that. The speaker in the Arabic language, who is eloquent in it, strives to adopt the beneficial form of expression according to the styles of the Arabs and their modes of communication, and organizes speech in that manner to the best of his ability. If his performances are connected with the speech of the Arabs, he acquires the faculty of structuring speech in that manner, and the matter of composition becomes easy for him, as he hardly deviates from the eloquence that belongs to the Arabs. If he hears a structure that does not conform to that style, he finds it strange and rejects it with the slightest thought, or even without thought, except for what he has gained from acquiring this faculty. When faculties become established and rooted in their places, they appear as if they are a natural instinct for that place. Therefore, many ignorant people, who do not understand the nature of faculties, believe that the correctness of the Arabs in their language, in terms of grammar and eloquence, is a natural matter. They say that the Arabs spoke naturally, but this is not the case. Rather, it is a linguistic faculty in structuring speech that has become established and rooted, appearing at first glance as if it were instinct and nature. This faculty, as previously mentioned, is only acquired through practicing the speech of the Arabs and repeating it audibly, and by being attentive to the specific characteristics of its structures. It is not acquired through knowledge of the scientific rules in this regard, which have been derived by the experts in the field of linguistics. These rules only provide knowledge of that language and do not lead to the actual acquisition of the faculty in its place, as has been previously stated. Once this is established, the faculty of eloquence in speech guides the eloquent speaker to the existence of structure and the beauty of composition that corresponds to the structures of the Arabs in their language and the organization of their speech. If a person with this faculty attempts to deviate from these specific paths and structures, he will not be able to do so, nor will his tongue agree with it, because he is not accustomed to it, and his established faculty will not guide him to it. When speech is presented to him that deviates from the style of the Arabs and their eloquence in structuring their speech, he will turn away from it and find it strange, knowing that it is not from the speech of the Arabs whose speech he has practiced. He may even be unable to argue against it, as the experts in grammatical and rhetorical rules do, as that is an inference based on the rules derived from observation. This is an experiential matter that is acquired through practicing the speech of the Arabs until one becomes like one of them. An example of this is if we assume a boy from among them grows up and is raised in their generation. He will learn their language and master the rules of grammar and eloquence in it until he fully grasps it. This is not a matter of legal knowledge. Rather, it is the result of acquiring this faculty in his speech and pronunciation. Similarly, this faculty can be acquired by those after that generation by memorizing their speech, poetry, and speeches, and by consistently engaging with them until they acquire the faculty and become like one who grew up in their generation and was raised among their people. The rules are separate from this, and the term taste has been borrowed for this faculty when it becomes established and rooted, which is a term that the experts in the field of rhetoric and taste have agreed upon, and it is originally used to denote the perception of flavors. However, since the place of this faculty in speech is similar to the place of perceiving flavors, its name has been borrowed for it. Moreover, it is an experiential matter of the tongue, just as flavors are tangible to it, hence it is called taste. If this is made clear to you, you will understand that the non-Arabs who enter the Arabic language, who are compelled to speak it due to their interaction with its people, such as the Persians, Romans, Turks in the East, and Berbers in the West, do not acquire this taste due to their limited share in this faculty that we have established, because their abilities are limited after a certain age, and another faculty has preceded it in their speech, which is their own languages, compelling them to pay attention to what the people of Egypt exchange among themselves in conversation, both simple and complex, due to their necessity for it. This faculty has diminished for the people of the cities, and they have distanced themselves from it, as previously mentioned. They only possess another faculty that is not the required linguistic faculty. Those who understand the rules of that faculty from the written laws in books do not acquire the faculty itself. They have only grasped its rules as you have understood. This faculty is only acquired through practice, habituation, and repetition of the speech of the Arabs. If you hear that Sibawayh, Al-Farisi, Al-Zamakhshari, and others like them, who are masters of speech, were non-Arabs while possessing this faculty, know that those people you hear about were only non-Arabs by lineage. As for their upbringing and development, it was among the people of this faculty from the Arabs and those who learned it from them, and they thus attained a level of speech that has no equal, as if they were among the first Arabs who grew up in their generations until they grasped the essence of the language and became part of it. Although they were non-Arabs by lineage, they were not non-Arabs in language and speech because they grasped the religion in its prime and the language in its youth, and the traces of the faculty did not fade away from the people of the cities. They then devoted themselves to practicing and studying the speech of the Arabs until they mastered it. Today, a single non-Arab who mingles with the people of the Arabic language in the cities will first find that desired faculty of the Arabic language to be absent. He will find his own faculty to be another one that contradicts the faculty of the Arabic language. If we assume that he engages in practicing the speech of the Arabs and their poetry through study and memorization, he may acquire it, but it is rare enough that it will not escape your notice as established. Many who look into these rhetorical laws may claim that they have acquired this taste through them, but this is a mistake or a misrepresentation. Rather, they have acquired the faculty, if they have, through those rhetorical laws, and it is not related to the faculty of expression at all. And God guides whom he wills to a straight path. Chapter 52. Regarding the fact that the people of the cities, in general, are deficient in acquiring this linguistic faculty that is obtained through education, and those among them who are further from the Arabic language find it more difficult and arduous to attain it. The reason for this is that the learner is often hindered by acquiring a faculty that contradicts the desired faculty due to the urban dialect that has been influenced by foreignness, which has caused their language to descend from its original mastery to another faculty, which is the language of the urban dwellers of this era. Therefore, we find teachers competing in teaching the language to children. The grammarians believe that this competition is due to their craft, but this is not the case. Rather, it is through the cultivation of this faculty, by mingling with the language and speech of the Arabs. Indeed, the craft of grammar is closer to this mingling, and the more a language of the people of the cities is rooted in foreignness and distance from the language of Muda, the more it hinders its speaker from learning the Muda language and acquiring its faculty due to the established contradiction at that time. Consider this in the case of the people of the cities. The people of Africa and the Maghreb, being more deeply rooted in foreignness and further from the original language, had a complete deficiency in acquiring its mastery through education. Ibn al-Rafiq reported that a certain writer from Kairouan wrote to a friend, "O my brother, may you never be deprived of his presence. Abu Sa'id informed me that you mentioned you would be with those who come, but we were hindered today, and we could not go out." As for the people of the House of the Dogs regarding the matter of the letter, they have falsely denied this. There is not a single letter of this. My letter to you, and I long for you, if God wills. Thus, their mastery of the Muda language was similar to what we mentioned. Likewise, their poetry was far from mastery and fell short of the standard, and it has remained so until this time. Therefore, there were no famous poets in Africa except Ibn Rashid and Ibn Sharaf. Most of the poets there were newcomers, and their level in eloquence has remained tilted towards deficiency until now. The people of Andalusia were closer to acquiring this faculty due to their extensive engagement and their abundance of linguistic memorization, both in verse and prose. Among them was Ibn Hayyan, the historian, the leader of the people of the craft in this faculty, and the standard-bearer for them in it, as well as Ibn Abdrabih, al-Saktuli, and their like from the poets of the kingdoms of the factions, as the seas of language and literature flourished among them, and this was passed down for hundreds of years until the dispersion and expulsion during the dominance of Christianity. They were preoccupied with learning that, and the decline of civilization led to the decline of all crafts, so their mastery diminished until it reached its lowest point. Among the last of them were Salih ibn Sharif and Malik ibn Marhal, from the students of the Seville class in Ceuta, and the book of the state of the Banu al-Ahmar at its beginning. Andalusia cast out its finest offspring of those masters through expulsion to the border, from the border of Seville to Ceuta, and from eastern Andalusia to Africa. They did not last long until they perished, and their chain of education in this craft was cut off due to the difficulty of acceptance of the border for it, and its difficulty for them due to the crookedness of their tongues and their deep-rootedness in Berber foreignness, which contradicts what we have said. Then the mastery returned to Andalusia as it was, and it flourished with Ibn Bashir, Ibn Jabir, Ibn al-Jiyab, and their class. Then Ibrahim al-Sahili al-Turahi and his class followed them, and after them came Ibn al-Khatib, who perished in this era, a martyr due to the scheming of his enemies. He had a mastery of the language that was unmatched, and his student followed in his footsteps. In summary, the status of this mastery in Andalusia is greater, and its education is easier and simpler due to their current state, as we have mentioned regarding their engagement with the sciences of language, and their preservation of them, and the sciences of literature, and the chain of their education. And because the people of the foreign language, whose mastery is corrupted, are merely newcomers to them. Their foreignness is not the origin of the language of the people of Andalusia and the Berbers in this border. They are its people, and their language is its language except in the cities only. They are immersed in the sea of their foreignness and their Berber dialect, making it difficult for them to acquire the linguistic mastery through education, unlike the people of Andalusia. Consider this in the case of the people of the East during the Umayyad and Abbasid states. Their situation was similar to that of the people of Andalusia in the completeness of this mastery and its proficiency due to their distance from the foreigners and their mingling with them, except in rare cases. The matter of this mastery during that era was more upright, and the prominent poets and writers were more numerous due to the abundance of Arabs and their children in the East. Look at what the Book of Songs contains of their poetry and prose, for that book is the book of the Arabs and their diwan, and it contains their language, their news, their days, their Arab religion, their biography, the effects of their caliphs and kings, their poetry, their songs, and all their meanings. There is no book that encompasses their conditions better than it. The matter of this mastery remained firmly established in the East during both states, and it may have been more eloquent among them than others who were in the pre-Islamic era, as we will mention later. Until the matter of the Arabs faded, their language became obscure, their speech deteriorated, their influence and state came to an end, and the matter fell to the foreigners, and the kings were in their hands, and they dominated. This was during the state of the Daylamites and the Seljuks. They mingled with the people of the cities and increased their numbers, so the earth was filled with their languages. Foreignness took over the people of the cities and the urban centers until they distanced themselves from the Arabic language and its mastery, and those who learned it among them fell short of acquiring it. Thus, we find their language in this era in the fields of poetry and prose, even though they are abundant in it. And God creates what he wills and chooses, and God the Almighty knows best, and with him is success. There is no Lord but him.
Chapter 53.
On the division of speech into poetry and prose. Know that the language of the Arabs and their speech is divided into two types: poetry, which is measured and rhymed speech, and prose, which is unmeasured speech. Each of these two types encompasses various forms and styles of speech. As for poetry, it includes praise, satire, and elegy. As for prose, it includes parallelism, which is presented in segments, with each two words adhering to a single rhyme called a saji, rhymed prose, and the murassal, which is speech that is released freely without being divided into parts, flowing without being constrained by rhyme or anything else. It is used in speeches, prayers, and in encouraging or frightening the public. The Quran, although it is prose, is outside of these two descriptions and is not called murassal or saj at all. Rather, it consists of verses that end at points where the taste indicates the conclusion of the speech. Then the speech is repeated in the following verse, and is reiterated without adhering to a specific letter that would make it saj, or a rhyme. This is the meaning of his saying, Allah has revealed the best speech, a book consistent in its verses, which causes the skin of those who fear their Lord to shiver. He also said, we have detailed the verses. The last verses among them are called fawasil, dividers, as they are neither saj, nor do they adhere to what is required in saj, nor are they rhymes. The term al-mathani, the repeated, is applied to all verses of the Quran in general for the reasons mentioned, and it is specifically associated with the opening of the book, al-Fatiha, due to its predominance in it, like the star for the Pleiades, and for this reason it is called the seven repeated. Consider this alongside what the interpreters have said regarding the reason for calling it al-Mathani, which confirms the truth of what we have said. Know that each of these forms has styles that are specific to it among its people, and are not suitable for the other form nor used in it, such as the nasib, the prelude, specific to poetry, and praise and prayer specific to speeches and addresses, and similar examples. The later generations have employed the styles and measures of poetry and prose due to the abundance of saj and adherence to rhyme, placing the nasib before the intended purposes. This prose, when examined, falls under the category of poetry and its art, differing only in measure. The later writers have continued in this manner and have used it in royal addresses, limiting the use of all prose to this art they have accepted, mixing styles within it, neglecting the murassal, and forgetting it, especially the people of the East. The royal addresses of this era among the negligent writers have followed this style we have indicated, which is incorrect from the perspective of eloquence, as it does not consider the application of speech to the requirements of the situation of the speaker and the addressed. This rhymed prose has led the later generations to incorporate poetic styles into it. Thus it is necessary to keep royal addresses free from it, as the styles of poetry contradict the seriousness required, and mix seriousness with frivolity, excessive description, the use of metaphors, and numerous comparisons and allusions where there is no necessity for that in the address. Adhering to rhyme is also a form of frivolity and embellishment, and the majesty of kings and rulers, and addressing the public on behalf of kings with encouragement and intimidation contradicts and opposes that. What is praiseworthy in royal addresses is the tarsil, flowing speech, which is the release of speech without rhyming except in rare instances. Where the speech is released by the speaker without effort, then giving the speech its due in matching it to the requirements of the situation. For the contexts are different, and each context has a style that is specific to it, whether it be elaboration, brevity, omission, affirmation, explicitness, indication, or metaphor. As for conducting royal addresses in this manner, which follows the styles of poetry, it is blameworthy, and what has led the people of this era to this is the dominance of foreign influences on their tongues and their inability to give speech its due in matching it to the requirements of the situation. Thus they have failed in unmeasured speech due to its distance in eloquence and the expansiveness of its topics. They have become enamored with this rhymed style, fabricating it to compensate for what they lack in applying speech to the intended purpose and the requirements of the situation. They embellish it with a degree of adornment through rhymes and beautiful titles, neglecting everything else. Most of those who have adopted this art and excelled in it in all its aspects are the writers and poets of the East in this era, to the extent that they neglect grammatical rules in words and inflections when they enter into a classification or matching that cannot coexist with them, favoring that type of classification. They abandon grammatical correctness and ruin the structure of the word in hopes of achieving classification. Thus, what we have presented to you confirms the validity of what we have mentioned, and God is the granter of success to the truth by his grace and generosity, and God knows best. Chapter 54. Regarding the fact that proficiency in both poetry and prose can only be achieved by a few, the reason for this is that, as we have explained, it is a skill of the tongue. If another skill precedes it, it limits the ability in that area from achieving the full subsequent skill. This is because the complete mastery of skills and their attainment for those with natural dispositions is easier and more straightforward. If another skill precedes it, it competes with it in the receptive material and hinders quick acceptance, leading to conflict and making it impossible to achieve mastery in that skill. This is universally true for all acquired skills. We have previously demonstrated this in a similar manner. Consider the same in languages, as they are skills of the tongue and are akin to crafts. Observe how someone who has been exposed to a foreign language is always deficient in the Arabic language. A non-Arab who has previously learned Persian will never fully master the Arabic tongue and will remain deficient in it, even if they learn and teach it. The same applies to Berbers and Romans. It is rare to find a European who has mastered the Arabic tongue. This is solely because their tongues have been previously influenced by another language, so that when a student of these languages seeks knowledge among Arabic speakers, they come up short in their understanding and acquisition, and they owe this to their language background. We have previously mentioned that languages are similar to crafts, and that crafts and their skills do not overlap. If someone has achieved proficiency in one craft, it is rare for them to excel in another or to reach the highest level in it. And God created you and what you do. Chapter 55. On the craft of poetry and the way to learn it. This art is one of the forms of the speech of the Arabs, known to them as poetry, and it exists in all languages. However, we are currently discussing the poetry of the Arabs. If it is possible to find in it the aims of speakers of other tongues, then each language has its own rules of eloquence. In the Arabic tongue, it is of a strange nature and rare direction, as it consists of words arranged in equal parts, each part having the same weight and a unified final letter. Each two parts of these segments is called a couplet, and the final letter where they agree is called the rhyme and the verse. The entire composition is referred to as a poem. Each couplet stands alone in its structure, as if it were a complete statement independent of what precedes or follows it. When isolated, it is complete in its category, whether in praise, love, or lamentation, and the poet strives to give that couplet a meaning that stands on its own. Then, in the next couplet, he begins another statement similarly, transitioning from one theme to another, ensuring that the first theme and its meanings lead to the second theme, avoiding any discord in the speech. For instance, he may transition from love to praise, from describing the wilderness and ruins to describing the mounts or horses, or from describing the praise to describing his people and soldiers, and from expressing grief and consolation in lamentation to emotional responses and similar themes. He must also ensure that the entire poem maintains a consistent weight, being cautious not to allow the natural flow to deviate from one weight to another that is similar, as this may go unnoticed by many people due to the similarity. These weights have conditions and rules encompassed in the science of prosody. Not every weight that is consistent in nature has been used by the Arabs in this art. Rather, there are specific weights that those in the craft call meters. They have confined them to 15 meters, meaning they found no other natural weights for the Arabs. Know that the art of poetry, among forms of speech, was esteemed by the Arabs. They made it the repository of their sciences and histories, a witness to their correctness and errors, and a foundation to which they refer in many of their sciences and judgments. Its mastery was firmly established among them, like all other skills. Linguistic skills are acquired through practice and training in their speech, until a resemblance is achieved in that skill. Poetry, among the forms of speech, is difficult to master for those who wish to acquire its skill through practice, as each couplet is a complete statement in its aim and can stand alone without the others, requiring a certain finesse in that skill until the poetic speech fits into the forms known to it in that direction of Arabic poetry and stands independently. Then he brings another couplet similarly, and then another, completing the forms that fulfill his aim. He must also create a connection between the couplets in a sequence according to the different themes present in the poem. Due to the difficulty of its nature and the strangeness of its art, it serves as a test for minds in refining its styles and sharpening thoughts in fitting speech into its forms. It is not enough to have a general mastery of Arabic speech. Rather, it requires particular finesse and effort in adhering to the styles that the Arabs have uniquely employed and used. Let us mention here the approach to style among those in this craft and what they intend by their expressions. Know that it is an expression for the model in which structures are woven or the mould in which they are cast. It does not refer to speech in terms of conveying the original meaning, which is the function of grammar, nor in terms of conveying the complete meaning from the properties of structures, which is the function of eloquence and clarity, nor in terms of weight as the Arabs have used it, which is the function of prosody. These three sciences are outside this poetic craft, and it only refers to a mental image of the organized structures as a whole, considering their application to a specific structure. That image is derived by the mind from the specific structures and their entities, forming it in imagination like a mold or model, then selecting the correct structures according to the Arab's grammar and clarity, arranging them as a builder does in a mold or a weaver does on a loom, until the mold expands with the structures that fulfill the aim of the speech and fits the correct image according to the mastery of the Arabic tongue in it. For every art of speech has styles that are specific to it and exist in various forms. For example, the inquiry about ruins in poetry may be through addressing the ruins, as in the line, "O dwelling of Maya in the highlands," or by calling upon companions to stop and inquire, as in, "Stop, let us ask the dwelling that its people have left," or by lamenting the companions over the ruin, as in, "Stop, let us weep for the memory of a beloved and a home," or by questioning about the answer from an unspecified addressee, as in, "Did you not ask, and the signs inform you?" And similarly, the greeting of the ruins may be through a command to an unspecified addressee to greet them, as in, "Hail to the dwellings beside the gossamer," or by praying for them to receive rain, as in, "May their ruins be watered by the fierce storm," or by asking for rain for them from the lightning, as in, "O lightning, rise to a home in the storm," or like expressing grief in sorrow by calling for weeping, as in, "So let the calamity be lamented, and let the matter be severe, for there is no excuse for an eye that has not shed its tears," or by expressing the enormity of the event, as in, "Did you see those who were carried on the gallows? Did you see how the light of the gathering dimmed?" Or by recording the calamity of loss, as in, "The grass has no protector, nor shepherd, for death has taken away the long spear and the arm," or by denying those who do not grieve for him among the inanimate, as in the words of the outsider, "O tree of the river, why are you green as if you did not grieve for Ibn Tarif?" Or by preparing his group for rest from the weight of his burden, as in, "Rabia ibn Nizar cast down the spears, and death has taken your brave group." And many such examples exist in all forms of speech and their methods. The structures in it are organized by sentences and non-sentences, both declarative and interrogative, nominal and verbal, agreeing separated and connected, as is the nature of structures in Arabic speech in the position of each word relative to the others. It informs you of what you can gain by practicing the poetry of the Arabs from the abstract overall mold in the mind of the specific structures that this mold applies to all of them. For the author of speech is like a builder or a weaver, and the mental image that applies is like the mold in which it is built or the model on which it is woven. If it deviates from the mold in its construction or from the model in its weaving, it becomes flawed. Do not say that knowing the laws of eloquence is sufficient for this, for we say that the laws of eloquence are merely scientific rules that allow the use of structures in their specific forms by analogy. It is a correct scientific analogy, just as the analogy of grammatical laws is. The styles we are establishing here are not based on analogy at all. Rather, they are forms that become ingrained in the soul from following the structures in Arabic poetry, flowing naturally until their image is firmly established, allowing one to work by their example and emulate them in every structure of poetry, as we have previously stated in general speech. The scientific laws of Arabic and eloquence do not benefit from being taught in any way. Not everything that is valid in the analogy of Arabic speech and its scientific laws has been used by them. What is used among them are known forms that those who memorize their speech can identify, and their image falls under those scientific laws. If one examines Arabic poetry in this manner, and with these mental styles that become like molds, it is an examination of what is used from their structures, not what is required by analogy. This is why we said that the acquisition of these molds in the mind is merely the memorization of the poetry and speech of the Arabs. These molds, as they exist in verse, also exist in prose, for the Arabs have used their speech in both forms, presenting it in detail in both types. In poetry, it is through measured segments and defined rhymes, with the speech being independent in each two segments, while in prose, they often consider the balance and similarity between segments, and they may restrict it with assonance. They may also allow it to flow freely, and each of these is known in the Arabic tongue. What is used among them is what the author of speech builds upon in his composition, and it is known only by those who have memorized their speech until it becomes abstract in their minds from the specific molds into a general mold that they follow in composition, just as a builder follows a mold and a weaver follows a model. This is why the composition of speech is distinct from the perspective of grammar, eloquence, and prosody. Indeed, observing the laws of these sciences is a condition that cannot be fulfilled without them. If all these qualities are present in the speech, it is characterized by a subtle observation of these molds that they call styles. It is only benefited by memorizing the speech of the Arabs in both verse and prose. Now that we have established the meaning of style, let us mention a definition or description of poetry that clarifies its essence despite the difficulty of this presentation. We have not found it defined by any of the ancients in what we have seen. The definition given by prosodists, that it is measured and rhymed speech, is not a definition for the poetry we are discussing, nor is it a description of it. Their craft only considers poetry in terms of the agreement of its verses in the number of movements and pauses in succession, and the similarity of the prosody of the verses to their type. This is a consideration of weight renewed from the words and their meanings. Thus, it is appropriate for them to have that as a definition, while we here consider poetry in terms of its grammar and eloquence, weight, and specific molds. Therefore, their definition does not suit us, and we must provide a definition that gives us its essence from this perspective. We say, poetry is eloquent speech built on metaphor and descriptions, composed of parts that agree in weight and rhyme, each part being independent in its aim and purpose from what precedes and follows, adhering to the specific styles of the Arabs. Thus, our statement eloquent speech is a genus, and our statement built on metaphor and descriptions is a distinguishing feature from that which lacks these, for it is generally not poetry. Our statement composed of parts that agree in weight and rhyme distinguishes it from prose, which is not poetry in the eyes of all. Our statement, each part being independent in its aim and purpose from what precedes and follows, clarifies the truth. For poetry cannot have its verses except in this manner, and nothing else is distinguished by it. Our statement, adhering to the specific styles of the Arabs, distinguishes it from the poetry of non-Arabs, as poetry exists for the Arabs and others. Those who believe it does not exist for others do not need that, and may say instead, adhering to the specific styles. Now that we have completed the discussion on the essence of poetry, let us return to the discussion on how to create it. Know that the creation of poetry and the mastery of its craft have conditions, the first of which is memorization from its kind, that is, from the poetry of the Arabs, so that a skill is developed in the soul that weaves according to its model, selecting the preserved from the pure, rich in styles. This preserved selection is at least sufficient to include the poetry of a poet from the prominent Islamic poets, such as Ibn Rabi'a, Kathir, Durruma, Jarir, Abu Nuwas, Habib, al-Bukhturi, al-Radi, and Abu Firas. Most of it is the poetry collected in the Book of Songs, as it includes the poetry of all the Islamic class and the selected poetry from the pre-Islamic era. Whoever is devoid of memorization will find their composition lacking and poor, and it will not possess the charm and sweetness except through abundant memorization. Thus, one who has little memorization or none will not have poetry. Rather, it is a fallen composition. It is preferable to avoid poetry for one who lacks memorization. Then, after being filled with memorization and sharpening the mind to weave according to the model, one should turn to composition, and through frequent practice, their skill will be solidified and established. It may be said that one of its conditions is to forget that memorized material so that its apparent literal traces are erased, as they arise from using it exactly. If one forgets it and has adapted to it, the style will be engraved in them, as if it were a model to be woven upon with similar words out of necessity. Then, it is essential for them to have solitude and a pleasant environment, surrounded by water and flowers, as well as sounds to illuminate the mind by gathering and energizing it with delights of joy. Moreover, it is a condition that they be in a state of readiness and energy, as this is the most conducive to the mind to produce something similar to that model in their memorization. They say that the best times for this are the early hours after waking from sleep, when the stomach is empty and the mind is active during these states of readiness. They may also say that one of its inspirations is love and ecstasy, as mentioned by Ibn Rashid in his book Al-Umda, which is the book that uniquely addresses this craft and gives it its due, and no one has written anything like it before or after him. They say that if it becomes difficult after all this, one should leave it for another time and not force oneself upon it. The construction of the couplet should be based on the rhyme from the very beginning of its formulation and weaving, and the speech should be built upon it until the end. For if one neglects to construct the couplet based on the rhyme, it will be difficult to place it in its proper position. Perhaps it may come out awkward and restless, and if the mind allows for the couplet, and it does not fit with what is at hand, one should leave it for a more suitable place, for each couplet is independent in itself, and only the connection remains, so one may choose as they wish and review their poetry after completing it through refinement and critique, and not be stingy with it if it does not reach perfection. For a person is enamored with their poetry, as it is the growth of their thought and the invention of their creativity, and they should not use anything in it except the most eloquent of structures and the purest of linguistic necessities, so they should avoid them, as they lower the speech from the level of eloquence. The masters of language have prohibited the use of necessity, as one is in a wide space to avoid it and turn to the optimal method of mastery. They should also avoid complex structures as much as possible, aiming for those whose meanings race ahead of their words to be understood. Likewise, an abundance of meanings in a single couplet complicates understanding. The chosen ones are those whose words align with their meanings or exceed them. If the meanings are many, it becomes filler, and the mind is used to delve into them, preventing the taste from fully grasping its eloquence. Poetry cannot be easy unless its meanings race ahead of its words to the mind. This is why our elders, may God have mercy on them, criticized the poetry of Abu Bakr ibn Khafaja, a poet from eastern Andalusia, for the abundance of his meanings and their crowding in a single couplet, just as they criticized the poetry of al-Mutanabi and al-Ma'ari for not adhering to the Arabic styles, as previously mentioned. Thus, their poetry was merely arranged speech that fell short of the level of poetry, and the judge of that is taste. The poet should also avoid harsh words and those that are simplistic, as well as the common and trivial expressions that are overused, as they lower the speech from the level of eloquence. Likewise, trivial meanings due to their fame lower the speech from eloquence, making it trivial and approaching a lack of benefit, such as saying, "The fire is hot and the sky is above us." The closer it gets to the level of lack of benefit, the further it is from the rank of eloquence, as they are two extremes. This is why poetry in divine and prophetic themes is often of little excellence, and only the prominent poets excel in it, and rarely does it reach 1/10 of the total, as its meanings are circulated among the public, making them trivial for that reason. If poetry becomes difficult after all this, one should wrestle with it and return to it, for the mind is like a udder that yields with inquiry and dries up with neglect and abandonment. In summary, this craft and its learning are thoroughly covered in Ibn Rushd's book, Al-Umda, and we have mentioned what we have attended to the best of our ability. Whoever wishes to fully grasp it should refer to that book, for it contains the essence of that. People have composed verses regarding this poetic craft, and one of the best things said about it, which I believe is by Ibn Rushd, is, "May God curse the craft of poetry. What from the ignorance of the ignorant have we encountered? They prefer the strange over what is easy for the listeners to understand, and they see the impossible as a correct meaning, and the lowly speech as something precious. They are ignorant of its correctness, and they do not realize their ignorance. They are blamed by those other than us, and in truth, they are excused by us. Indeed, poetry is what fits in the arrangement, and even if it has various attributes, some of it resembles some, and the chests of the listeners are its foundations. Every meaning that comes to you from it is as you wish, and it cannot be otherwise. It has reached the point of clarity to the observer, so that the words are like faces, and the meanings have settled in them like eyes. In pursuit of the goal, according to wishes, it adorns itself with the beauty of the reciters. So when you praise a noble man in poetry, you aim for the paths of the desirous. You made the love easy and close, and you made the praise truthful and clear. You avoided what is offensive to the ear, even if its wording is measured. And when you present it with invective, you criticize it with the methods of the observant. You made the explicit statement a remedy, and you made the insinuation a hidden ailment. And when you weep for the homes and their people, you bring forth the hidden tears of sorrow. Then if you are reproaching, you come with a promise and a warning, and with clarity between the two. You left what you reproached with caution, safe, noble, and humble. And the best poetry is what approaches the arrangement, even if it is clear and evident. If it is said that people are greedy, and if it is said that the miraculous is beyond the miraculous. And from that too is the saying of some, and he is al-Nashi. Poetry is what I have measured by the quarter of its beginnings, and I have tightened its foundations with refinement. I have seen in its length the branches of its fractures, and I have opened its eyes with brevity. I have gathered between its near and far, and I have gathered between its gathered and its flowing. And if I praised a noble, generous man, I fulfilled his rights with gratitude. I have purified him with scrutiny and made him worthy, and I have specified him with what is precious and valuable. So it becomes substantial in the course of its types, and it becomes easy in the agreement of its arts. And if I weep for the homes and their people, I have brought forth the water of their hidden affairs. And if I wanted to allude to suspicion, I have made clear between its appearances and its depths. So I made the listener mix his doubts with certainty and assumptions. And your sin turns into a reproach against the one who commits it, demanding by his oath.
Chapter 56.
On the craft of poetry and prose. Being in words, not in meanings. Know that the craft of speech, whether in poetry or prose, is indeed in the words, not in the meanings. The meanings are merely subordinate to it, and are the essence. The craftsman who seeks the skill of speech in poetry and prose is actually seeking it in the words by memorizing examples from the speech of the Arabs to increase its usage and flow on his tongue until he establishes the skill in the tongue of Muda and frees himself from the foreignness he was raised with in his nature, imposing himself like a child raised in the Arabian highlands, learning their language as a child learns it, until he becomes as if he is one of them in their speech. This is because we have established that the tongue has a skill among the skills of articulation, which one seeks to acquire by repeating it on the tongue until it becomes a characteristic of the skills. What is in the tongue and articulation is indeed the words, while the meanings reside in the minds. Furthermore, meanings exist within each individual and are at the disposal of every thought, as one wishes and pleases. Thus there is no need to exert effort in crafting them. The crafting of speech to express them is what requires skill, as we have said, and it is akin to the molds for the meanings. Just as the vessels used to scoop water from the sea include vessels of gold, silver, shell, glass, and pottery, while the water itself is one in essence. The quality of the vessels filled with water differs based on their material, not the water itself. Similarly, the quality and eloquence of language in usage differ based on the levels of speech in its composition, considering its application to the intended purposes. The meanings are one in essence, and the ignorant one in composing speech and its methods according to the skill of the tongue, when attempting to express his intent, is like a person who wishes to rise but cannot due to a lack of ability. And God teaches you what you did not know. Chapter 57. Regarding the fact that acquiring this faculty requires extensive memorization and its quality depends on the quality of what is memorized. We have previously established that extensive memorization is essential for anyone who seeks to learn the Arabic language. The quality of the faculty obtained by the memorizer is proportional to the quality and quantity of what is memorized. Those who memorize the poetry of the early Islamic Arabs, such as the poetry of Habib, al-Atabi, Ibn al-Mu'taz, Ibn Hani, al-Sharif al-Razi, the letters of Ibn al-Mukaffa, Sahal ibn Harun, Ibn al-Zayyat, al-Badi, and al-Sabi, will have a superior and higher-ranking faculty in eloquence compared to those who memorize the poetry of Ibn Sahal from the later poets, or Ibn al-Nabih, or Tarasul al-Baisani, or al-Imad al-Asbahani, due to the lower status of these latter poets. This is evident to the discerning critic with a refined taste. The quality of usage thereafter is determined by the quality of what is memorized or heard, followed by the proficiency of the faculty. As the memorized material rises in its class of speech, the resulting faculty also elevates, for nature is shaped by its model, and the powers of the faculty grow through nourishment. Although the soul is inherently one in type, it varies among humans in strength and weakness in perceptions. Its differences arise from the varying perceptions, faculties, and influences that shape it from the outside. Thus, its existence is completed, and it transitions from potentiality to actuality, with its form and faculties developing gradually, as we have mentioned. The poetic faculty arises from memorizing poetry, the writing faculty from memorizing rhymes and prose, the scientific faculty from engaging with sciences, perceptions, inquiries, and reflections, the jurisprudential faculty from engaging with jurisprudence, analyzing issues, deriving branches from principles, and the divine mystical faculty from worship, remembrance, and the suspension of the external senses through solitude and separation from people as much as possible, until one attains the faculty of returning to their inner sense and spirit, becoming divine, and similarly for the others. The soul has a specific quality in each of these that shapes it, and according to the quality on which the faculty was developed, whether good or poor, that faculty will be in itself. The high-ranking eloquence faculty in its genre is only attained by memorizing the high-quality speech in its class. This is why jurists and scholars are all deficient in eloquence, and this is only due to what has been previously memorized and filled with scientific laws and jurisprudential expressions that deviate from the style of eloquence and are lower in rank. For expressions derived from laws and sciences have no share in eloquence. If that memorized material precedes thought and becomes abundant, and the soul is colored by it, the resulting faculty will be severely deficient, and its expressions will deviate from the styles of the Arabs in their speech. Thus, we find the poetry of jurists, grammarians, theologians, and others who have not filled themselves with the pure, free speech of the Arabs. Our esteemed companion Abu al-Qasim ibn Ridwan, the scribe of the Mark in the Merinid state, told me, "One day I mentioned our companion Abu al-Abbas ibn Shu'aib, the scribe of Sultan Abu al-Hassan, who was prominent in his knowledge of the language in his time. I recited to him the opening of a poem by Ibn al-Nahwi without attributing it to him, which is, 'I did not leave when I stood by the ruins. What is the difference between its new and its old?' He immediately said, This is the poetry of a jurist. I asked him, "How do you know that?" He replied, "From his saying, 'What is the difference?' as it is one of the expressions of jurists, and not from the styles of the speech of the Arabs." I said to him, "May God have mercy on you. It is Ibn al-Nahwi." As for the writers and poets, they are not like that due to their selection in what they memorize and their mingling with the speech of the Arabs and their styles in prose, choosing the good from the speech. One day, I discussed with our companion Abu Aind Allah ibn al-Khatib, the minister of the kings in Andalusia from the Banu al-Ahmar, who was a leading figure in poetry and writing. I said to him, "I find it difficult to compose poetry whenever I attempt it, despite my insight into it and my memorization of the good speech from the Quran, Hadith, and various forms of the speech of the Arabs, even though my memorization is limited. I have come, and God knows the truth of the matter, from what I have memorized of scientific poetry and compositional laws. I have memorized the 2 poems of Al-Shatibi, the Greater and the Lesser, in readings in writing, and I have committed them to memory and studied Ibn al-Hajib's book on jurisprudence and principles, and Al-Kunj's summary in logic, and some of the book of facilitation, and many educational laws in the councils, so my memorization has been filled with that, and it has scratched the face of the faculty that I prepared for with the good memorization of the Quran, Hadith, and the speech of the Arabs, causing my intellect to falter in reaching its potential." He looked at me for a moment, admiringly, and then said, "By God, you are right. And who but you would say this?" From this chapter, and what has been established in it, another secret emerges, which is the reason why the speech of the Islamic Arabs is of a higher rank in eloquence and its tastes than the speech of the pre-Islamic Arabs in their prose and poetry. We find the poetry of Hassan ibn Thabit, Umar ibn Abi Rabia, Al-Hutayya, Jarir, Al-Farazdak, Nasib, Ghaylan al-Rumani, Al-Ahwas, and Bashar, and then the speech of the early Arabs during the Umayyad state and the early Abbasid state in their sermons, prose and dialogues with kings, is of a higher rank in eloquence than the poetry of Al-Nabiga, Antara, Ibn Kulthum, Zuhair, Al-Akil ibn Abda, and Tarfa ibn al-Abd, and from the speech of the pre-Islamic Arabs in their prose and dialogues. The sound nature and correct taste are witnesses to this for the discerning critic of eloquence. The reason for this is that those who embraced Islam heard the high class of speech in the Quran and Hadith, which humanity has failed to produce anything like, as it penetrated their hearts and their souls grew on its styles. Thus their natures elevated, and their faculties in eloquence advanced beyond those who came before them, from the pre-Islamic people who did not hear this class nor grow up on it. So their speech in their poetry and prose was better in eloquence and purer in tone than those, and more structured in form and more balanced in expression due to what they benefited from the high-class speech. Reflecting on this will testify to you by your taste if you are among those with taste and insight in eloquence. One day, I asked our Sheikh al-Sharif Abu al-Qasim, the judge of Granada in our time, who was a master of this craft, having learned in tutor from a group of its scholars, and he excelled in the science of language and came to surpass its limits. I asked him one day why the Islamic Arabs are of a higher rank in eloquence than the pre-Islamic Arabs. He would not have denied this by his taste, so he remained silent for a long time, and then said to me, "By God, I do not know." I said, "I present to you something that has appeared to me regarding this, and perhaps it is the reason." I mentioned to him what I have written, and he remained silent, admiringly, and then said to me, "O jurist, this is a statement worthy of being written in gold." After that, he favored my locality and listened in teaching sessions to my words and testified to my intelligence in the sciences, for God created man and taught him eloquence. Chapter 58. On the explanation of natural and artificial speech and how the quality of artificial speech may be good or lacking. Know that speech, which is expression and discourse, derives its essence and spirit from conveying meaning. If it is neglected, it is like dead matter that holds no significance. The perfection of conveying meaning is eloquence, as you have learned from its definition among the masters of rhetoric, for they say it is the correspondence of speech to the requirements of the situation. Understanding the conditions and rules that allow verbal structures to correspond to the requirements of the situation is the art of eloquence. These conditions and rules for structures in correspondence have been derived from the Arabic language and have become like laws. The structures, by their nature, convey the relationship between the subject and the predicate, under conditions and rules that are the main laws of Arabic. The states of these structures, such as precedence and postponement, definiteness and indefiniteness, concealment and revelation, restriction and release, and others, convey the judgments surrounding the relationship and the interlocutors during discourse, under conditions and rules that are laws for an art they call the science of meanings, which is one of the branches of eloquence. Thus, the laws of Arabic are included in the laws of the science of meanings because their conveyance of the relationship is part of their conveyance of the surrounding states through the relationship. If any of these structures falls short of conveying the requirements of the situation due to a flaw in the rules of grammar or the rules of meanings, it is deficient in correspondence to the requirements of the situation and is akin to the neglected, which is considered dead. Following this conveyance of the requirements of the situation is the art of transitioning the structure between meanings through various types of indications, as the structure indicates a meaning by its nature and then shifts the mind to its necessary or related implications or similarities, resulting in metaphor, either through metaphor or metonymy, as established in its place, and this transition provides pleasure to thought, as it does in conveyance, and even more so. For in all of them, there is a grasp of the indicated from its indication. Grasping is one of the causes of pleasure, as you know. Furthermore, these transitions also have conditions and rules like laws, which they have turned into an art and called it rhetoric. It is akin to the science of meanings, which conveys the requirements of the situation because it pertains to the meanings of structures and their implications. The laws of the science of meanings pertain to the states of the structures themselves in terms of indication. The word and the meaning are closely intertwined, as you have learned. Therefore, if the science of meanings and the science of rhetoric are parts of eloquence, and through them comes the perfection of conveyance, one who lacks them is deficient in eloquence and is likened by eloquent speakers to the sounds of mute animals, and is more deserving of not being considered Arabic, for the Arab is one who corresponds in his conveyance to the requirements of the situation. Thus, eloquence is the essence of Arabic speech, its nature, spirit, and character. Then know that when they say natural speech, they mean speech whose nature and character are complete in conveying its intended meaning, for it is expression and discourse, not merely intended for utterance. Rather, the speaker aims to fully convey to the listener what is in his mind and to indicate it with certainty. Following the structures of speech in this inherent character are forms of embellishment and adornment, after the perfection of conveyance, as if they give it the luster of eloquence through the refinement of rhymes, balancing between the carrying of speech and dividing it into various categories of rules, and using ambiguous words to conceal hidden meanings, and the correspondence between opposites to achieve harmony between words and meanings. This results in speech having a luster and pleasure in the ears, sweetness and beauty, all of which are additional to the conveyance. This craft is present in miraculous speech in various contexts, such as by the night when it covers, and by the day when it appears, and like, as for he who gives and fears, and believes in the best, to the end of the division in the verse. Likewise, as for he who transgresses, and prefers the worldly life, to the end of the verse. And also, they think they are doing well. There are many similar examples. This is after the perfection of conveyance in the essence of these structures before this embellishment occurs within them. The same applies to the speech of the pre-Islamic era, but it occurred naturally without intention or design. It is said that it appeared in the poetry of Zuhair. As for the Muslims, it occurred for them both naturally and intentionally, and they produced wonders from it. The first to perfect its method was Habib ibn Aws, al-Buhturi, and Muslim ibn al-Walid, for they were passionate about the craft and produced astonishing works. It is said that the first to delve into it was Shaz ibn Bard and Ibn Harmala, and they were the last to be cited for their poetry in the Arabic tongue. Then came Amr ibn Kulthum, al-Atabi, Mansur al-Namiri, Muslim ibn al-Walid, and Abu Nuwas. Following in their footsteps were Habib and al-Buhturi. Then Ibn al-Mu'taz appeared, sealing the beginning and the craft altogether. Let us mention an example of natural speech devoid of craft, such as the saying of Qais ibn Durai, "And I go out from between the houses, perhaps I may speak of you to my soul in secret alone," and the saying of Kuthayya, "And I, in my longing for Izzah, after I have abandoned what was between us, and I have left you, like the shadow of the cloud, all of it has diminished." So consider this natural speech, devoid of craft, in the rules of its composition and the culture of its structure. If craft were to come into it after this origin, it would enhance its beauty. As for the artificial, it has been abundant since Bashar, then Habib, and their contemporaries, then Ibn al-Mu'taz, the seal of the craft, who influenced the later generations in their field and patterned their works after them. The types of this craft have multiplied among its practitioners, and their terminologies have varied in their titles. Many of them consider it to be included in eloquence, as it does not fall under conveyance, and that it provides embellishment and luster. As for the earlier masters of rhetoric, they consider it outside of eloquence. Therefore, they mention it in literary arts that have no subject. This is the opinion of Ibn Rachiq in his book Al-Umda and the Literati of Al-Andalus. They mentioned conditions for using this craft, including that it should occur without effort or concern for what is intended from it. As for naturalness, there is no discussion about it, for if it is free from effort, the speech is free from the defect of distaste, because its effort and labor lead to neglect of the original structures of speech, thus impairing the conveyance from its essence and completely undermining eloquence. Only those embellishments remain in the speech, and this is what predominates today among the people of the era. The connoisseurs of eloquence mock those who are burdened with these arts, considering it a deficiency compared to others. I heard our teacher, Sheikh Abu al-Barakat al-Balfiki, who was knowledgeable in language and talent, say in his taste that one of the most delightful things I could propose to myself is to witness one day someone who adopts the arts of this rhetoric in his poetry or prose, and he is punished with the severest punishment, and it is proclaimed against him, warning his student not to engage in this craft, lest they become burdened by it and forget eloquence. Then, among the conditions for its use among them is moderation, that it should be in 2 or 3 verses of poetry, sufficient for the adornment and luster of poetry. Excessive use of it is a defect, as stated by Ibn Rachiq and others. Our teacher Abu al-Qasim al-Sharif al-Sabti, a master of the Arabic tongue in Al-Andalus in his time, said, "These rhetorical arts, if they occur to a poet or a writer, it is inappropriate to overuse them, for they are embellishments and adornments of speech, akin to beauty marks on the face, which look good in 1 or 2, but become unattractive when numerous. In proportion to the structured speech, it is the unstructured speech in the pre-Islamic and Islamic eras. Initially, it was considered a free flow, balancing between its sentences and structures, with its balance evident in its pauses, without adhering to rhyme or concern for craft. Until Ibrahim ibn Hilal al-Sabi, the scribe of the Banu Buya, emerged, engaging in craft and refinement, producing wonders. People criticized him for his effort in royal addresses. What drove him was the foreignness and distance from the authority of the caliphate that would have supported the market of eloquence. Then the craft spread after him in the prose of the later generations, and the era of free flow was forgotten, and the royal and brotherly addresses and the Arabic ones became similar to the common ones. The pasture mixed with the neglected. All of this indicates that artificially crafted speech, through effort and obligation, is inferior to natural speech, due to the lack of concern for the essence of eloquence, and the judge in this matter is taste. And God created you and taught you what you did not know.
Chapter 59.
On the elevation of the people of rank above the appropriation of poetry. Know that poetry was a treasury for the Arabs, containing their sciences, news, and wisdom. The leaders of the Arabs were competitors in it, and they would gather at the souk of Ukaz to recite it, each one presenting his verses to the prominent figures and the knowledgeable to distinguish their quality. They even reached the point of hanging their poems on the corners of the sacred house, the place of their pilgrimage, and the house of their father Ibrahim, as did Imru al-Qais ibn Hujr, the Nabiga al-Dubyani, Zuhair ibn Abi Sulma, Antara ibn Shaddad, Tarafa ibn al-Abd, al-Asha, and others from the 7 suspended odes. Only those who had the ability to do so among their people and their kin could hang their poetry there, as was said regarding the reason for calling them the suspended odes. Then the Arabs turned away from that at the beginning of Islam, due to their preoccupation with matters of religion, prophecy, and revelation, and what astonished them from the style and structure of the Quran, so they became silent about poetry and prose for a time. Then this settled, and guidance from the faith became familiar. Revelation did not come down prohibiting poetry or forbidding it, and the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, heard it and rewarded it, so they returned to their former practice. During that time, Umar ibn Abi Rabi'a, a prominent figure of Quraysh, had high statuses in poetry and was often presenting his verses to Ibn Abbas, who would stop to listen, admiring them. Then came the era of the great kings and the esteemed state, and the Arabs approached them with their poetry, praising them. The caliphs would reward them with the greatest prizes based on the quality of their poetry and their status among their people, and they were keen to seek their poetry to learn about history, news, language, and the nobility of speech. The Arabs would demand their children memorize it. This continued during the days of the Umayyads and the early period of the Abbasid state. Look at what the author of The Necklace transmitted regarding the conversation of al-Rashid with al-Asma'i about poetry and poets. You will find what al-Rashid knew about it, his deep understanding, and his care for its appropriation, as well as his discernment of good and bad speech and the abundance of what he memorized. Then came a generation after them whose language was not their own due to foreignness and their inadequacy in the language. They only learned it as a craft and then praised the foreign princes with their poetry, seeking their favor, not for any other purpose, as did Habib, al-Bukhturi, al-Mutanabi, Ibn Hani, and those after them, and so on. Thus, the purpose of poetry became mostly about deceit and begging for the loss of the benefits that it once had for the earlier generations, as we mentioned earlier. Because of this, the people of ambition and rank among the later generations distanced themselves from it, and the situation changed, making its practice a disgrace in leadership and a reproach for those in high positions. And God is the turner of night and day. Chapter 60. On the poetry of the Arabs and the people of the cities of this era. Editor's note. This is another chapter that we felt that the majority of poems might be lost in translation or sound hard to understand in English due to extensive use of specific metaphors or play on words that would only make sense in the Arabic language. That being said, we opted in to include it as the stories surrounding these poems might be interesting for the listeners. Please excuse the raw poetry translation as you listen in. Know that poetry is not exclusive to the Arabic tongue. It exists in every language, whether Arabic or foreign. There were poets among the Persians and also in Greece, and Aristotle mentioned among them the poet Homer in his book on logic and praised him. There were also advanced poets in Himyar. When the language of Mudar deteriorated, and their grammar, which had been documented with its rules and laws of inflection, became corrupted, the languages that mixed with it also deteriorated. This led the Arabs themselves to adopt a language that contradicted the language of their ancestors from Mudar in terms of inflection and many linguistic topics and word formation. Similarly, the urban dwellers of the cities developed another language that differed from the tongue of Mudar in inflection and most of the structures and forms, and it also differed from the language of the generation of Arabs in this era. The language varied among itself according to the conventions of the people of different regions. The people of the East and their cities have a language different from that of the people of the West and their cities, and the language of the people of Andalusia also differs from both. Since poetry naturally exists among the people of every tongue, as the metrics are uniformly based on the number of vowels and consonants, which are inherent in human nature, poetry was not abandoned due to the loss of one language, namely the language of Mudar, who were renowned for their eloquence and prowess in the field, as is well known among people. Rather, every generation and every group of Arabs, whether they are assimilated or urban dwellers, engage in poetry that aligns with their own speech patterns and the structure of their language. As for the Arabs of this generation, who have deviated from the language of their ancestors from Mudar, They present poetry in all its forms, as it was in the time of their Arab predecessors, producing lengthy works that encompass the themes of poetry and its purposes, such as love, praise, lamentation, and satire, and they often transition from one genre to another in their discourse. They might begin their poems with the name of the poet and then attribute it afterward. The people of the cities in the West call these poems al-Asma'iyat, in reference to al-Asma'i, the narrator of Arab poetry, while the people of the East refer to this type of poetry as Bedouin and Harani and Kaisi. They may sometimes introduce simple melodies that do not follow the rules of musical composition, and they sing them, calling this singing Harani, in reference to Haran, which is on the borders of Iraq and the Levant, and is one of the homes of the Bedouin Arabs to this day. They have another form that is widely circulated in their compositions, which they present in a structure of 4 parts, where the last part differs from the first 3 in its rhyme, and they adhere to the 4th rhyme in each line until the end of the poem, resembling the Maktua and Mukamis that were introduced by later generations of the newly emerged poets. These Arabs possess exceptional eloquence in this poetry, and among them are the masters and the later poets, as well as many who have adopted the sciences of this era, especially the science of language. The owner of this knowledge finds these forms distasteful when he hears them and rejects their structure when recited, believing that his taste has turned away from them due to their oddity and the lack